Hey guys! Tonight we slip into the bone-chilling world of a medieval winter, where the wind howls like a pack of hungry wolves, and your breath freezes before it leaves your lips. Picture yourself standing in a muddy village, the sky a heavy gray, snowflakes stinging your face like tiny knives. Your toes are already numb in your thin boots, and the truth hits hard. You probably won't survive this. Winter here isn't just cold. It's a merciless beast that chews up the unprepared. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and the time where you are. I love picturing you all cozy while we dive into this frosty nightmare. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a medieval village, somewhere in Europe, maybe 13th century. The air bites at your exposed skin, and the cold seeps through your rough wool tunic like it's made of cobwebs. Winter's arrived, and it's not messing around. Your hut, a wobbly stack of wood and straw, groans under the first snowfall. You're not ready. Nobody is. The harvest was meager this year. Too much rain in summer, then a drought that turned fields to dust. Your grain sacks are half empty, and the thought of 6 months of this makes your stomach twist. Let's talk mainstream history. Medieval winters were brutal because of something called the Little Ice Age, a period of cooling that started around the 1300s. Temperatures dropped, growing seasons shrank, and famines became as common as dirt. Villages like yours lost entire families to hunger and cold. Now, for a quirky tidbit, people back then thought piling snow around their huts insulated them. Spoiler, it didn't. It just made escaping the house a daily workout. Historians still argue whether the Little Ice Age caused more deaths from starvation or disease, since both were winter's best friends. You trudge through the village, snow crunching underfoot. The blacksmith's hammer is silent. He can't afford charcoal to keep the forge going. Your neighbor, a wiry old woman named Agnes, is outside, hacking at frozen mud to reach her turnips. She curses the sky, then laughs, saying the devil's making it snow to spite her. You chuckle, but it's a weak laugh. Her turnips are your turnips if you're desperate enough to steal. And you might be. The village is a ghost town, everyone huddled inside, saving energy. You pass a frozen stream, its surface cracked like a broken mirror. Somewhere, a dog barks, and you flinch. Is it a stray? A wolf? You don't want to find out. Your hut's door is stiff, half frozen shut. You shove it open, and the smell hits. Damp straw, smoke, and something sour you don't want to name. Your family's inside. Your spouse, 2 kids, and a grandmother who mutters prayers all day. The fire's low, barely a flicker. You toss in a stick, knowing you're burning through your woodpile too fast. The kids are curled up on a straw mat, shivering under a single blanket. You want to promise them warmth, food, a tomorrow, but your throat's tight. Promises feel like lies in winter. Speaking of lies, here's a joke to lighten the mood. Why did the medieval peasant bring a ladder to bed? Because he heard the fire was going out and wanted to catch it. Okay, maybe not your best laugh, but you're distracted, staring at the frost creeping up the walls. You pull your cloak tighter, wishing it was thicker. The wind whistles through a crack, mocking you. You think of modern heaters, those glowing miracles that could thaw your bones in minutes. fat chance. Here it's you versus nature, and nature's got a mean streak. You sit by the fire, the only light in the room. Grandmother's praying again, something about St. Cuthbert saving you from frostbite. You're not sure you believe it, but you don't stop her. Faith's all she's got, and it's free. You rub your hands, noticing the dirt under your nails. Bathing's a summer luxury. Right now, you're caked in grime and okay with it. Survival trumps pride. You glance at the kids, their faces pale, eyes big. They're hungry, and you've got nothing but a handful of barley to boil tomorrow. You tell yourself it's enough. It has to be. The village elder warned everyone last week. Ration now or starve by February. You listened, but it's hard to ration when your stomach's screaming. You think of the Lord's castle miles away, where they're probably roasting pigs and sipping wine. You'd kill for a crumb from their table, but you shake off the thought. Envy's a lousy blanket. Instead, you focus on the fire. Its faint crackle a small comfort. You'll need more wood tomorrow, which means a trek into the forest. The thought makes you groan. Your boots are more whole than leather. Here's another joke. What's a medieval peasant's favorite winter sport? Shivering. You smirk, but it fades fast. The cold's not funny when it's real. You lie down, straw poking through your clothes. The kids are asleep, or pretending to be. You pull them close, their small bodies a faint warmth. Outside, the wind howls, and you wonder if Agnes got her turnips. You wonder if you'll make it to spring. For now, you close your eyes, letting the fire's glow fade behind your lids. Your eyes snap open in the dim hut, the fire now a pile of glowing embers. The cold's crept in overnight, wrapping your bones like a damp shroud. You're starving, the kind of hunger that feels like a fist twisting your guts. Remember that handful of barley you rationed for today? It's not enough, and you know it. You're not just feeding yourself. There's your spouse, the kids, and grandmother, who's still muttering prayers like they'll fill her stomach. The village is locked in winter's grip, and food is scarcer than a sunny day. You're facing starvation, and the darkness of your hut mirrors the gloom in your chest. You haul yourself up, straw crackling under your weight. The kids are awake, their breath puffing in little clouds. They don't complain, but their eyes follow you, hopeful, desperate. You avoid their gaze and check the grain sack. It's pitifully light, maybe enough for a week if you stretch it with water and lies. You think of Agnes and her turnips. Did she get them out of the frozen ground? You're tempted to check, maybe beg or barter, but pride stops you. For now. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval famines were common during winter because poor harvests couldn't sustain populations through months of snow. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, for instance, killed millions across Europe, with some villages losing half their people. Now for a quirky tidbit, some peasants ate grass or tree bark to survive, grinding it into a grim flour that tore up their insides. Historians still argue whether famine deaths were more from starvation itself or the diseases that preyed on weakened bodies. You shuffle to the door, the cold wood stinging your palms. Outside, the village is silent, blanketed in fresh snow. The stream's frozen solid now, no chance of fishing. Not that there's much left under the ice. You think of the forest, where you might find roots or a scrawny hare, but the thought of trudging through snowdrifts makes your legs ache. Your boots, more patches than leather, won't survive another week. You curse yourself for not mending them in autumn. But who had time between the harvest and the Lord's endless taxes? Speaking of taxes, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant hide his grain? Because the tax collector's appetite was bigger than his? You snort, but it's a bitter laugh. The Lord's men will come soon, demanding their share, and you've got nothing to give but excuses. You turn back to the hut, where your spouse is boiling water over the embers. The kids huddle close, watching the pot like it's a miracle. You toss in the barley, stirring it into a thin gruel. It smells like despair, but you force a smile. Eat slow, you say, knowing it's all there is. The gruel's gone in minutes, and the kids are still hungry. Grandmother takes a sip, then pushes her share to the youngest. You want to argue, but she's stubborn as stone. You sit by the fire, the faint warmth mocking your shivering. Your mind drifts to stories of summer, when the fields were green, and you could steal an apple from the Lord's orchard. Now, the orchard's bare, and the Lord's guards are hungrier than you. You think of the castle again, its stone walls holding back the cold while you're out here, one storm away from collapse. You glance at the window, a scrap of oiled cloth that lets in more draft than light. The snow's piling up, and you realize you haven't seen the sun in days. Time feels slippery in winter, each day blending into the next. You try to count how long you've been rationing, but the numbers slip away. Your spouse catches your eye, their face etched with worry. "We'll make it," they whisper, but it sounds like a prayer, not a promise. You nod, because what else can you do? Here's another joke to break the mood. What's a medieval peasant's favorite meal? The one he doesn't have to share with the rats. You chuckle, but it's forced. The rats are real, scurrying in the walls, eyeing your grain sack. You've set traps, but they're smarter than you'd like. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool scratchy and damp. The kids are playing now, stacking straw into pretend castles. Their laughter's a small spark, but it fades when their stomachs growl. You wish you could give them more, but wishes are as useless as snow in a stew. You think of the village baker, who used to slip you a crust when times were better. His oven's cold now, his flour gone. You heard he's eating his own shoe leather, and you're not sure if it's a rumor or a warning. The thought makes you check your own boots. Could you boil them? You shake your head, ashamed it's come to this. Instead, you focus on the fire, tossing in another stick. The woodpile's shrinking, and you dread the forest trip tomorrow. Wolves, cold, and bandits wait out there, but hunger's a worse enemy. The day drags on, the hut growing darker as snow buries the window. You tell the kids a story, something about a hero who slayed a dragon and ate its heart. They listen, eyes wide, forgetting the cold for a moment. You wish you were that hero, but you're just a peasant, fighting a winter that doesn't care. As night falls, you lie down, the straw poking your back. The kids curl up beside you, their breath warm against your arm. You close your eyes, the fire's crackle fading, and hope tomorrow brings something, anything, to eat. You wake to a world muffled by snow, the air in your hut so cold it stings your lungs. The fire's down to ashes, and your family's crammed together on the straw mat, sharing what little warmth their bodies can muster. You're not alone. Your cow, a bony thing that hasn't given milk in weeks, is tethered in the corner, her breath steaming in the gloom. The smell of unwashed bodies, animal dung, and stale smoke is thick, but you're used to it. Winter's turned your home into a crowded, smoky cave, and you're all just trying to survive the night. You crawl to the hearth, your joints aching like you're twice your age. The kids are shivering, their teeth chattering in a rhythm that breaks your heart. Your spouse is already up, poking at the ashes, trying to coax a spark. Grandmother's awake too, her prayers softer now, like she's saving her strength. The cow lows, a pitiful sound, and you wonder if she's as hungry as you are. You're all in this together, packed tight to beat the cold, but it's a losing battle. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants often shared their homes with livestock during winter to conserve heat, turning huts into cramped, filthy shelters. This was common across Europe, especially in colder regions like England or Germany. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some families slept with their pigs, believing their body heat was better than a blanket, though the pigs weren't great at sharing the bed. Historians still argue whether this cohabitation caused more diseases or saved lives by keeping people warm. You grab a stick from the dwindling woodpile and jab at the ashes. A faint glow flickers, and you blow gently, your breath shaky. The fire catches, barely, and you add another stick, knowing you're burning through your supply too fast. The cow shifts, her ribs sharp under her hide. You'd sell her for a sack of grain, but no one's buying, and she's your last hope for spring plowing. You glance at the kids, wrapped in their thin blanket. They're watching the fire like it's a storyteller, and you wish it could spin a tale of warmth and full bellies. Speaking of stories, here's a joke. Why did the medieval cow sleep so close? Because she wanted to be the little spoon. You smirk, but the kids don't hear, too focused on the fire's faint crackle. You're grateful for the flame, small as it is. Without it, you'd all be ice by morning. The hut's walls are patched with mud and straw, but the wind sneaks through every crack, whistling like a ghost with a grudge. You stuff a rag into the worst gap, your fingers numb. You think back to that barley gruel from yesterday. Remember how it vanished too fast? There's nothing for breakfast, not even a crumb. Your stomach's a hollow pit, and you know the kids feel it worse. You catch your spouse's eye, and they nod toward the corner, where a scrap of dried fish is hidden. It's barely a bite, saved for an emergency. Is this it? You hesitate, then shake your head. Not yet. You'll try the village first. Maybe beg from Agnes or the baker. Pride's a luxury you can't afford anymore. The hut's getting smokier, the fire's fumes trapped by the low roof. Your eyes sting, but you don't open the door. Letting in the cold is worse. You cough, and the kids echo you, their small lungs struggling. You think of summer, when you could breathe fresh air and sleep under stars. Now, the stars are hidden by clouds, and the night's a black void that swallows hope. You pull the kids closer, their bony frames pressed against you. They're quiet, too tired to talk, but their warmth is a reminder they're still here. Here's another joke. What's a medieval peasant's favorite roommate? A cow because she's got no rent and plenty of mood. You chuckle softly, but it fades fast. The cow's not funny when she's starving too. You think of the village, where everyone's in the same mess. The blacksmith's probably burning his tools for warmth, and the baker's out of flour. You heard a rumor yesterday. Someone saw the miller eating his own belt. You hope it's just talk, but your own boots are looking edible. You glance at grandmother, her hands clasped, lips moving. She's praying for a miracle, maybe a warm wind or a deer wandering into the village. You don't believe in miracles, but you let her pray. It keeps her calm and calm's in short supply. You think of the Lord's castle, where they've got roaring fires and bread to spare. You'd walk there, beg at their gates, but the snow's too deep, and the guards don't care for peasants. You're stuck here, in this smoky, freezing hut, with a family you'd die for, and no way to save them. The day creeps by, the light barely changing. You take turns tending the fire, each stick a sacrifice. The kids start a game, piling straw into shapes, but their hands shake from cold. You watch, your heart heavy. You think of the forest, where you'll have to go tomorrow for wood or food. The thought of wolves makes you shiver, but hunger's a bigger beast. You lie down, the straw sharp against your back. The cow grumbles, the fire pops, and the kid's breathing slows. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where warmth isn't a fight. The air in your hut is thick with smoke and the sour tang of unwashed bodies, but it's the silence that wakes you. No wind howls outside, no fire crackles, just the soft wheeze of your youngest child's breath. You sit up, straw jabbing your skin, and notice the cold's sharper today, like a blade pressed to your cheek. The fire's dead, and the hut feels like a tomb. You're not alone in your misery. The whole village is a breeding ground for disease, and that cough from your kid is a warning you can't ignore. Winter's not just starving you, it's stalking you with sickness, and your crowded, filthy hut is the perfect trap. You crawl to the hearth, your hands shaking as you fumble for flint. The kids are curled up, your spouse beside them, all shivering under a blanket that's more holes than wool. Grandmother's awake, her eyes glassy, muttering about angels. The cow in the corner looks worse, her head low, ribs like a washboard. You strike the flint, sparks dying in the ash. Your chest tightens, not just from cold, but fear. That cough. You've heard it before, in other huts, before families stopped coming outside. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval winters fueled diseases like pneumonia and dysentery, which thrived in cramped, unsanitary conditions, killing thousands each year. Poor nutrition weakened immune systems, making every cough a potential death sentence. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers believed tying an onion to their chest could ward off plague, though it mostly just made them smell like soup. Historians still argue whether poor hygiene or malnutrition was the bigger killer in these disease-ridden winters. You finally get a spark to catch, a tiny flame licking a twig. You guard it like it's gold, adding sticks until the fire's steady. The light shows your kid's face, pale and sweaty despite the cold. You touch their forehead, too warm. Panic claws at you, but you shove it down. You think of the village healer, a grumpy old man who charges a chicken for a visit. You don't have a chicken, but you'll beg if you have to. Disease doesn't care about your empty pockets. Speaking of empty, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant fear a sneeze? Because it was the plague's way of saying, "Tag, you're it." You force a smile, but it's hollow. The cough comes again, sharp and wet. Your spouse stirs, their eyes meeting yours. They don't say it, but you both know. Sickness in winter is a thief that steals whole families. You think of Agnes, who lost her son last winter to a fever. She still talks to him when she thinks no one's listening. You pull your cloak on, the wool damp and heavy. You'll go to the healer, but first you check the grain sack. Empty, except for a dusting of barley. That dried fish you hid is your last card, but you can't use it yet. Not with a sick kid. You step outside, the snow blinding, the cold stealing your breath. The village is a graveyard of humps, huts buried under drifts. You trudge toward the healer's, passing the baker's hut. No smoke from his chimney. You hope he's just out of wood, not gone. The healer's door is shut, but you knock, your knuckles raw. He opens it a crack, his face sour. "What's it now?" he grumbles. You explain the cough, the fever. He snorts, saying it's probably winter's curse, but he'll come for a price. You offer your boots, useless as they are, and he laughs, saying he'd rather have a loaf. You promise to find something, anything, and he agrees to come at dusk. You trudge back, the snow soaking your feet, your mind racing. Back in the hut, the fire's low but alive. Your kid's coughing harder now, each sound a stab to your gut. You think of that onion trick. Maybe it's worth a shot? You don't have an onion, but you've got some moldy garlic. You tuck it under their blanket, feeling foolish but desperate. Your spouse raises an eyebrow but doesn't argue. Grandmother's praying louder now, calling on saints you've never heard of. You wish you had her faith, but all you've got is fear and a flickering fire. Here's another joke. What's a medieval doctor's favorite tool? A good guess, because that's all he's got. You chuckle, but it's weak. The day drags, the hut dark despite the fire. You take turns holding the sick kid, their heat burning your chest. You think of the castle, where lords have physicians and clean beds. You'd trade your soul for one night there, but souls don't buy medicine. You check the garlic, still just garlic, no miracles. The cow groans, and you wonder if her milk could help, but she's dry as dust. Dusk comes and the healer arrives, his bag clinking with herbs and bones. He examines your kid, muttering about bad humors. You don't understand, but you nod, clinging to hope. He leaves a foul-smelling paste and says to pray. You thank him, your boots still on your feet, for now. You smear the paste on your kid's chest, the smell making you gag. The fire pops, the only sound besides that cough. You lie down, the straw cold, the kids close. You pray, not to saints, but to morning, hoping it brings a quieter chest and a warmer day. You're awake before dawn, the hut dark as a cave, the air so cold it feels like breathing needles. The fire's your lifeline, and it's barely alive. A few embers glowing like dying stars. You scramble to your knees, your breath clouding, and poke at the ashes. Your kid's cough echoes in the gloom, softer now, but still there, a ghost that won't leave. The healer's paste didn't work miracles, but you're not giving up. You're obsessed with the fire, because without it, your family's done. The cow's breath steams in the corner, the kids shiver under their rag of a blanket, and you know one truth. If the flames go out, so do you. You grab a stick from the woodpile, noticing it's dangerously low, maybe 3 days' worth if you're stingy. Your hands tremble as you feed the embers, coaxing a flicker into a flame. The fire's warmth is a tease, barely reaching your fingers, but it's enough to keep despair at bay. You glance at your family, their faces pale in the faint light. Your spouse is awake, eyes on the fire too, like it's a prayer you're both chanting. Grandmother's silent for once, her hands still. Even the cow seems to watch, her eyes dull with hunger. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Fire was critical in medieval winters, as most homes relied on open hearths for heat and cooking. but wood shortages were common due to overharvesting and feudal restrictions on forest access. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some peasants burned dried dung when wood ran out, which kept them warm, but made their huts smell like a barnyard's bad day. Historians still argue whether wood scarcity or poor fire management caused more winter deaths in villages like yours. You sit back. The fires crackle a small victory. You think of the forest, where you'll have to go soon for more wood. The idea makes your stomach knot. Snowdrifts, wolves, and your holy boots aren't a great mix. You remember last winter, when the miller's brother never came back from a wood run. They found him frozen, half buried, his axe still in hand. You shake off the memory and focus on the flames, their dance hypnotic. You'd kill for a stack of logs, but the Lord's men patrol the woods, and cutting trees without permission means a whipping, or worse. Speaking of lords, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant love his fire? Because it was the only thing that didn't owe the Lord taxes. You smirk, but the kids don't stir. They're asleep, or pretending, their breath uneven. Your sick kid's cough is quieter, but you don't trust it. You think of that garlic you tucked under their blanket. Remember that desperate move? It's still there, doing nothing but stinking. You're tempted to toss it in the fire, but you let it be. Superstition's a lousy doctor, but it's better than nothing. You check the grain sack, a habit now, even though you know it's empty. That dried fish is still hidden, your last resort. But you're not there yet. You think of Agnes, wondering if she's got a spare turnip. You'd trade your cloak for it, though you'd freeze without it. The village feels like a trap, everyone hoarding what little they have. You heard the baker's sick now, his hut cold as yours. You hope it's just a rumor, but hope's getting harder to come by. The fire's steady now, but it's eating wood faster than you'd like. You think of the castle, where they've got massive hearths and servants to keep them roaring. You imagine sneaking in, stealing an armful of logs, but it's a fantasy. The guards would gut you before you reach the gate. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool scratching your neck. The wind's picking up outside, rattling the door. You stuffed rags in the cracks yesterday, but they're not enough. The cold's a thief, slipping in to steal your warmth. Here's another joke. What's a medieval fire's favorite song? Burn, baby, burn. You chuckle softly, but it's forced. The cow shifts, her hoof scraping the dirt floor. You wish you could feed her, but there's no hay, no scraps. She's your plow, your future, but she's fading. You think of the healer, who took your promise of payment but left you with nothing but smelly paste. You're angry, but anger doesn't warm the hut. You glance at your spouse, their face etched with worry. "We'll get more wood," you whisper, and they nod, though you both know it's a gamble. The day creeps in, the light gray and weak. You take turns tending the fire, each stick a countdown. The kids wake, their eyes big, the sick one coughing less, but looking frail. You tell them a story about a magic fire that never died, and they listen, huddled close. It's a lie, but it buys you a moment of peace. You think of the forest again, the axe you'll carry, the cold you'll face. You're not ready, but the fire's hungry, and so are you. You lie down, the straw sharp, the flames flickering. You close your eyes, the fire's glow a faint promise, and pray it lasts the night. You're up before the light, the hut's chill wrapping you like a wet cloak. The fire's holding on, a faint glow you've nursed like a sick child, but it's not enough to push back the cold. Your kid's cough is softer today, a small mercy, but your stomach's screaming, and the grain sack's as empty as your hopes. You can't stay in this smoky cage another day, praying for miracles. The forest calls, promising wood and maybe food, roots, berries, a desperate hare if you're lucky. You grab your axe, its handle worn smooth, and step into the snow, knowing frostbite's waiting if you slip up. Outside, the village is a frozen wasteland. Huts buried under drifts, no smoke rising. The silence is heavy, broken only by your boots crunching snow. You pass Agnes's hut, her door shut tight. You think of her turnips, but you keep moving. Pride or shame, you're not sure which. The forest looms ahead, trees bare and sharp against the gray sky. Your cloak's too thin, the wind cutting through like a blade. You tighten your grip on the axe, your fingers already numb. This isn't a stroll, it's a gamble with winter itself. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants relied on forests for survival, gathering wood and foraging for food, but feudal laws often restricted access, with lords claiming forests as their own. Poaching or cutting trees could mean fines or mutilation. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers believed forest spirits guarded the trees, so they'd leave offerings like breadcrumbs to avoid bad luck. Spoiler, the spirits didn't help much. Historians still argue whether starvation or exposure killed more foragers in winter's brutal months. You trudge deeper, snow up to your knees, each step a fight. Your boots are soaked, the holes letting in slush that numbs your toes. You think of that dried fish back home. Remember that last resort? You're not there yet, but the forest isn't promising much. The trees are skeletal, no leaves, no fruit. You scan the ground for roots, but the snow's a thick blanket, hiding anything edible. You dig with your axe, the blade dull, your hands stinging. Nothing but frozen dirt. You curse under your breath, then laugh. Who's listening? Just the wind, mocking you with a low howl. Speaking of howling, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant talk to the trees? Because they were better listeners than the Lord. You snort, but it's a weak laugh, your breath steaming. You keep moving, eyes peeled for tracks, a rabbit, a deer, anything. You spot a twig snapped low, maybe a hare, but the trail's old, buried by fresh snow. You think of wolves, their howls carrying at night. Your axe feels small against that kind of hunger, but you're not turning back. The fire needs wood, and your family needs you. You find a fallen branch, half rotten but dry enough to burn. You hack at it, the axe biting deep, chips flying. It's not much, but it's a start. You drag it behind you, the weight slowing you down. Your stomach growls, loud enough to scare a bird from a nearby tree. You watch it flutter away, wishing you had a sling. You think of the kids, their pale faces, and push harder. You dig again, finding a frozen turnip, small and shriveled. You tuck it in your cloak, a treasure worth more than gold. The cold's deeper now, settling in your bones. You think of the hut, the fire you left burning low. What if it's out? You shake off the thought and keep searching. You spot a bush with red berries, but you hesitate. Some are poison, and you're no herbalist. You leave them, cursing your ignorance. You think of the healer, his bag of herbs and bones. He'd know, but he's not here, and you're not paying him again for guesses. You hack another branch, your arms aching, your breath short. Here's another joke. What's a medieval forager's favorite game? Hide and freeze. You chuckle, but it's bitter. The forest feels alive watching you stumble. You remember those spirit stories, the offerings villagers left. You've got no bread, but you mutter a quick please to the trees, feeling foolish. The wind answers, sharp and cold. You're hours in now, your haul pitiful, 2 branches and a turnip. Your toes are gone, numb beyond feeling. You think of frostbite, of the miller's brother, frozen with his axe. You grip yours tighter, a lifeline. The sky's darkening, and you know you can't stay. You turn back, dragging your wood, the turnip a small weight in your cloak. The village comes into view, a smudge against the snow. You pass the baker's hut, still no smoke. Your chest tightens, but you keep moving. Your hut's door is ahead, and you push it open, the fire still alive, barely. Your spouse looks up, hope in their eyes. You drop the wood, hand over the turnip. The kids stir, your sick one quiet for now. You sit by the fire, the cold still in your bones, and pray the forest gives more tomorrow. You're back in your hut, the fire flickering with the wood you dragged from the forest, its faint warmth a fragile shield against the cold. The turnip you found, remember that shriveled prize? Is boiling in a pot, its earthy smell mingling with smoke and despair. Your family's eyes are on it, but you're all thinking the same thing. It's not enough. Outside, the village is a frozen prison, and the church looms large, its shadow heavier than the snow. You're clinging to faith to survive this winter, but the priests are after your last coins, and their promises of salvation feel as cold as the wind rattling your door. You stir the pot, the turnip bobbing in watery broth. The kids are quiet, their coughs softer but still there, a reminder of the healer's useless paste. Your spouse tends the fire, and grandmother's praying again, her voice a low drone. The cow's in the corner, her breath weak, her ribs sharper than yesterday. You're all holding on, but the church's grip is tight. The priest's been preaching about God's wrath, saying winter's a punishment for sin. You're not sure you buy it, but doubt's a luxury when hope's this scarce. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The medieval church was a dominant force, controlling not just spiritual life, but also land, wealth, and politics, with tithes, often 10% of a peasant's produce, demanded even in harsh winters. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some priests sold indulgences, claiming a coin could buy forgiveness for sins, though it mostly just lined their pockets. Historians still argue whether the church's wealth helped or harmed peasants during crises like famines and cold snaps. You think of the church, its stone walls sturdy, while your hut crumbles. Last Sunday, the priest stood at the pulpit, his robes thick, his belly round, demanding tithes for the Lord. You had nothing but a few barley grains. Remember that empty sack? But he didn't care. Give, or face eternity's fire, he said, his voice booming. You slipped out early, avoiding his gaze, but the guilt lingers. You need the church's comfort, its promise of spring and salvation. But coins are food, and you're starving. Speaking of starvation, here's a joke. Why did the peasant skip church? He was too busy praying for a potato. You smirk, but the kids don't laugh, their eyes on the pot. You ladle out the turnip broth, a spoonful each, barely enough to wet their tongues. Grandmother refuses hers, pushing it to the youngest. You want to argue, but her stare shuts you up. You sip your share, the taste thin and bitter. The fire pops, and you add a stick, the forest's gift already shrinking. You think of the priest, warm in his rectory, eating bread while you choke down turnip water. You glance at the door, half expecting the priest's knock. He's been visiting huts, checking on souls, but really sniffing out tithes. You've got nothing to give, not even that dried fish you're hiding. You think of the village, where some still drag themselves to church, hoping prayers will thaw the snow. Agnes goes, her faith stronger than her hunger. You wonder if she's trading turnips for God's favor. You tried praying once, after the harvest failed, but the sky stayed gray, and your stomach stayed empty. The hut smoky, the fire's fumes stinging your eyes. You think of the church's candles, their golden glow, the incense that doesn't choke. You'd trade your axe for one night in that warmth, but peasants don't get pews. They get sermons about suffering. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool damp from yesterday's forest trek. The kids are asleep now, their breaths shallow. Your sick one's quieter, but you don't trust it. You think of that garlic under their blanket, still there, still useless. Faith in herbs or priests, it's all starting to feel the same. Here's another joke. What's a medieval priest's favorite coin, the one you don't have? You chuckle, but it's hollow. The cow shifts, her hoof scraping dirt. You wish you could sell her, but the market's dead, and she's your plow. You think of the Lord, who tithes to the church while taxing you to death. Between the two, you're squeezed dry. You heard a rumor, the priest's hoarding grain, saying it's for God's work. You don't believe it, but you don't dare say it. Blasphemy's a quick way to a noose. The day drags, the light weak through the snow-buried window. You tell the kids a story about a saint who turned snow to bread, but their eyes are heavy, unconvinced. You're not sure you believe it either. The fire's low, the turnip gone. You think of the church again, its bells silent today. You wonder if God's listening, or if he's as cold as the lords and priests. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kids' warmth faint. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you close your eyes, dreaming of a world where faith fills bellies, not coffers. Night's fallen, and your hut's a smoky cocoon, the fire's faint glow your only anchor in the dark. The turnip broth is a distant memory, your stomach gnawing itself raw. The kids are asleep, their breaths uneven, that cough still lingering like an unwanted guest. You're wrapped in your cloak, the wool stiff with frost, but it's the darkness outside that chills you most. Winter nights breed fear, and you're whispering charms against wolves and worse. Spirits, the villagers say, who haunt the snow. You're not sure you believe, but you mutter the words anyway, just in case the night's listening. You shift on the straw. The fires crackle a soft lullaby, but sleep won't come. Every creak of the hut makes you flinch. Is it the wind, a wolf, or something older, hungrier? You think of the forest, where you dragged that wood and turnip yesterday. The villagers' stories echo, spirits in the trees, vengeful ghosts of poachers who crossed the Lord. You scoffed in daylight, but now, with the fire low and the wind moaning, you're not so sure. You trace a charm in the dirt, a crooked cross, and hope it's enough. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval Europe was steeped in superstition, with winter's long nights fueling beliefs in supernatural forces like demons, fairies, and restless spirits, often tied to Christian and pagan traditions. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers hung horseshoes over doors, believing they'd trap evil spirits, though they mostly just annoyed the blacksmith who had to make them. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were a coping mechanism for winter's hardships or a genuine belief in a haunted world. You glance at the door, half expecting a ghostly knock. The kids are curled up, your sick one quieter, but their faces pale. The healer's paste a smelly failure. You think of that garlic under their blanket? Remember that desperate trick? It's still there, mocking you. You're tempted to burn it, but you don't. Charms, garlic, prayers, they're all you've got when the night feels alive. You think of grandmother, who taught you the cross charm. She's silent now, her hands still, but her stories of spirits linger, each one a warning to stay inside after dark. Speaking of warnings, here's a joke. Why did the medieval ghost haunt the village? Because he heard the rent was free. You smirk, but it's a shaky laugh, your eyes darting to the window's oiled cloth, where snow presses like a hand. You think of wolves, their howls carrying last week, closer than you'd like. You've seen their tracks near the forest, too big for comfort. Your axe is by the door, its blade dull, but better than nothing. You wonder if spirits are worse than wolves, or if they're just stories to keep kids from wandering. You pull the kids closer, their warmth a small comfort. Your spouse stirs, their eyes catching the firelight. Heard something? They whisper. You shake your head, but you're both listening, the silence heavy. You think of the village, where Agnes swears she saw a shadow last winter, tall and eyeless by the stream. You laughed then, but now you wonder. You mutter another charm, this one for the fire to last, and add a stick, the woodpile shrinking fast. You think of the forest again, where you'll have to go soon. Spirits or not, hunger's the real ghost. The cow grumbles at the corner, her breath weak. You wish you could feed her, but there's nothing. Not even that dried fish you're hiding. You think of the church, the priest's sermons about demons punishing sinners. Is this winter your fault? You shake off the thought, but it lingers, cold as the straw beneath you. You think of the Lord's castle, where they don't whisper charms. They've got stone walls and guards. You'd trade your axe for one night there, but the night doesn't barter. Here's another joke. What's a medieval spirit's favorite prank? Blowing out your fire just for kicks? You chuckle, but it's forced. The fire's glow too precious to joke about. The wind picks up, rattling the door, and you tense, axe in reach. You think of the baker, whose hut's been dark too long. Did a spirit get him, or just the cold? You don't want to know, but you'll check tomorrow, maybe beg for a crust. The kid's breathing steadies, and you lie back, the straw sharp. The fire pops, a small defiance, and you whisper one last charm, not for spirits, but for dawn. You're awake in the pre-dawn gloom, the hut's air so cold it feels like swallowing ice. The fire's a faint pulse, barely alive, and you're huddled in your cloak. its threadbare wool as useless as a promise in winter. You're shivering, your teeth chattering, and you realize your clothing's no match for this relentless chill. The kids are curled up, their breaths puffing in clouds, the sick one's cough, a soft echo. Your spouse tends the fire, and grandmother's muttering charms again, her voice thin as the blanket you all share. The cow's still, her ribs a stark reminder of hunger. You're all fading, and your cloak's thin defense is crumbling against the bone-chilling winds. You pull the cloak tighter, its edges frayed, the wool patched with scraps that don't hold. It's your only armor, but it's failing. Damp from snow, stiff with frost, and too short to cover your legs. Your tunic underneath is worse, a rag that's been mended so often it's more thread than cloth. Your boots, those holy disasters, let in slush with every step. You think of yesterday's forest trek. Remember that frozen turnip? And how the wind sliced through you like a thief. You're not dressed for this, and winter doesn't care. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants wore simple, often inadequate clothing, wool tunics, cloaks, and leather shoes, lacking insulation, with most unable to afford furs or layered garments reserved for the wealthy. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers stuffed straw into their clothes for warmth, which worked until it got wet and turned to icy clumps. Historians still argue whether exposure from poor clothing or malnutrition was the bigger killer in winter's brutal grip. You shuffle to the fire, your fingers numb as you add a stick. The wood pile's a sad pile now, each piece a countdown to another forest trip. You think of the Lord's castle, where they wear furs and sip wine by roaring hearths. You'd trade your axe for a single fur, but you're stuck with this cloak, which smells of smoke and despair. The kids stir, their faces pale, eyes big. You notice your youngest's tunic is torn, a gap exposing their skinny arm. You want to fix it, but you've no thread, no time. Survival's eating every spare moment. Speaking of survival, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant love his cloak? Because it was his only friend that didn't run from the cold. You smirk, but it's weak, your hands shaking as you tuck the blanket over the kids. You think of Agnes, who's got a thicker cloak, maybe from better days. You wonder if she'd trade it for that turnip broth you shared. Remember that watery meal? You're not there yet, but desperation's creeping closer. The village is a ghost town, everyone hoarding warmth like gold. You glance at the door, the wind whistling through its cracks. You stuffed rags there, but they're frozen now, useless as your boots. You think of the church, where the priest wears heavy robes, preaching about suffering while his hands stay soft. You went last week, hoping for warmth, but the stone floor was colder than your hut, and the tithe box loomed like a vulture. You gave nothing. Your coins are long gone, spent on a sack of grain that's now dust. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for a thicker cloak, feeling foolish but desperate. The fire's low, the hut smoky. Your spouse catches your eye. Their own cloak as bad as yours, patched with a scrap of sackcloth. We'll mend them, they say, but you both know it's a lie. There's no wool, no leather, just hunger and cold. You think of the baker, whose hut's been dark. Did his cloak fail him, or something worse? You'll check today. Maybe beg for a crust, though you've nothing to trade but promises. The cow shifts, her breath faint. You wish you could wrap her in your cloak, but she's as cold as you. Here's another joke. What's a medieval peasant's favorite fashion tip? Wear your cloak backward. It's twice as useless. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The winds howl, drowning your thoughts. The kids are awake now, shivering, their tunics no better than rags. You tell them a story about a magic cloak that warmed whole villages, but their eyes are dull, unconvinced. You're not sure you believe it either. The fire pops, a small spark, and you guard it like a treasure. You think of the forest, where you'll go again, your cloak flapping like a flag of surrender. The day creeps in, the light gray and cruel. You pull your boots on, the leather cracking, your toes already numb. You think of frostbite, of the miller's brother, frozen in the snow. Your cloak won't save you, but you wrap it anyway, a habit more than hope. The kids huddle by the fire, your sick one quieter, but frail. You kiss their forehead, the garlic still under their blanket, a useless charm. You grab your axe, the cold biting your hands, and step out, the wind laughing as it tears through your cloak, daring you to survive another day. You're back in your hut, the fire a weak flicker, the air heavy with smoke and the sour stench of survival. Your cloaks draped over your shoulders, still damp from yesterday's trek, doing little to stop the shivers. The kids are huddled by the hearth, their coughs softer but stubborn, and your spouse is stirring a pot of nothing, water mostly, with a whisper of turnip from that forest find. Grandmother's prayers are a faint hum, and the cow's breath is a slow, sad rhythm in the corner. You're all filthy, caked in grime, and the smell of unwashed bodies and damp straw is a cloud you can't escape. Winter's turned hygiene into a cruel joke, and you're living in a misery of dirt and stench. You scratch at your neck, feeling the crust of sweat and soot. Bathing's a memory from summer, when the stream wasn't frozen, and you could spare the time. Now, water's for drinking, not washing, and the cold would kill you before the dirt does. Your tunic's stiff with grime, your hair matted, and you're pretty sure something's crawling in it. You glance at the kids, their faces smudged, eyes dull. You'd give anything for a bucket of warm water, but that's as likely as a feast. The fire's your only comfort, and even that's choking you with smoke. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval hygiene was minimal, especially in winter, as bathing was rare due to cold, lack of water, and the belief that washing could invite illness. Most peasants lived in filth, sharing space with livestock. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers rubbed mint leaves on their skin, thinking it cleaned them, though it just made them smell like a questionable stew. Historians still argue whether poor hygiene or malnutrition caused more disease in winter's cramped, dirty huts. You poke the fire, the embers flaring briefly. You think of the stream, locked in ice, no good for washing or drinking. You've been melting snow, but it's slow, and the pot's always needed for food, or what passes for it. You look at your hands, black with soot, nails cracked. You're not vain, but the filth feels like defeat, a reminder of how far you've fallen. You think of the Lord's castle, where they've got basins and servants to warm water. You'd trade your axe for one bath, but the castle's a world away, and you're stuck here, stinking like the cow. Speaking of stench, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant skip a bath? Because the dirt was his only blanket. You smirk, but it's grim, your eyes stinging from smoke. You think of Agnes, who's probably as filthy as you, her turnips long gone. You wonder if she's still going to church, hoping cleanliness is next to godliness. You tried that once, but the priest's sermons about purity didn't scrub the grime off your soul or your skin. You glance at the kids, their hair tangled, faces streaked. You want to clean them, but there's no water, no soap, just hunger. You think of that dried fish, still hidden. Remember that last hope? You're not desperate enough yet, but the thought of its salty bite makes your mouth water. You shake it off and check the woodpile, pitifully small. Another forest trip looms, and you dread it. Your cloak too thin, your boots useless. You think of the baker, whose hut's been dark. Maybe he's got a scrap of soap. Or maybe he's gone, lost to cold or sickness. You'll check today, though begging's a bitter pill when you've nothing to trade but your pride. The hut's a haze of smoke and stink, the fire's fumes burning your throat. You cough, and the kids echo you, their lungs weak. You think of summer, when you could dunk in the stream and feel human. Now, you're half beast, sharing space with a cow who's cleaner than you. She at least licks her hide. You laugh, a dry sound, and your spouse glances over, their own face grimy. "We're a sight," they mutter, and you nod, too tired to reply. The cow shifts, her smell blending with yours, a symphony of misery. Here's another joke. What's a medieval peasant's favorite perfume? Ode to smoke and despair. You chuckle, but it's forced. The kid's too hungry to care. You tell them a story about a magic spring that washed away winter, but their eyes are heavy, the filth on their cheeks like war paint. You're not sure you believe the tale either. The fire pops, a small spark, and you guard it. The only thing keeping you from freezing in this stinking tomb. You think of the church, the priest's clean robes, his talk of purity. You'd rather have his water than his blessings. The day creeps in, the light gray through the snow-buried window. You pull your cloak on, its smell part of you now, and grab your axe. You'll check the baker's hut, maybe find a crust or a miracle. The kids huddle by the fire, your sick one quieter but frail. You kiss their grimy forehead, the garlic still under their blanket, a useless charm. You step out, the cold biting your filthy skin, the wind carrying the village's collective stench. You're not clean, but you're alive, and that's enough for now. You're trudging through the village, snow crunching under your holy boots, the cold gnawing at your filthy skin. The fire's still burning back in your hut, a faint hope you left your spouse to guard, but you're out here, dodging more than just the wind. The Lord's men are about, collecting taxes you can't pay, and whispers of bandits, thieves who'd slit your throat for a crust, keep you clutching your axe. Your cloak's no shield, damp and thin, and your stomach's a hollow ache, that dried fish still hidden but tempting. Winter's a battlefield, and you're caught between barons and brigands, just trying to make it home alive. The village is a frozen maze, huts half buried, no smoke rising from most. You pass Agnes's place, her door shut, no sign of her turnips or her. You think of the baker, whose hut you meant to check, but a shadow moves near the church, and you freeze. Is it a bandit? A taxman? You duck behind a snowdrift, heart pounding. The figure moves on. A stray dog, ribs sharp as yours. You exhale, but the fear lingers. You're not safe, not with lords bleeding you dry and thieves prowling the dark. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants faced heavy feudal taxes, often paid in grain or labor, even in winter, while bandits thrived in hard times, preying on desperate villages. Lords enforced their dues with armed men, leaving little for survival. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Some peasants hid grain in hollow trees to dodge taxes, though rats often found it first. Historians still argue whether banditry or feudal oppression caused more misery during winter's lean months. You keep moving, axe in hand, eye scanning the snow. The Lord's men came last week, demanding a sack of barley you didn't have. Remember that empty grain sack? They took your only stool instead, saying it'd do for now. You hate them, their polished boots and warm cloaks, but you're powerless. You think of the forest, where bandits hide, waiting for fools like you. You went there for wood and that turnip. Remember that small victory? But next time you might not be so lucky. Your axe is dull, your strength fading. Speaking of fading, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant carry an axe? To chop taxes and bandits in half. You smirk, but it's bitter. Your fingers numb around the handle. You think of the kids, their pale faces by the fire. The sick ones cough softer but stubborn. You're out here for them, hoping the baker's got a crust or Agnes a turnip to trade. You near the baker's hut, its chimney cold, door ajar. You call out, voice hoarse, but no answer. You step inside, the air stale, a broken loaf on the floor, moldy but edible. You grab it, guilt mixing with relief. The wind howls and you hurry out, clutching the bread. You spot tracks in the snow, boots, too big for a villager. Bandits? Taxmen? You don't wait to find out, bolting toward home. You think of the castle, where the Lord sits fat and safe, his men your tormentors. You'd burn his gates if you could, but fire's for survival, not revenge. You think of the church, the priest's tithes as bad as taxes. Between lords, priests, and thieves, you're a mouse in a trap, scurrying to feed your family. You reach your hut, shoving the door open. The fire's low but alive, your spouse's eyes wide with worry. You drop the moldy bread, a grim treasure, and they nod. No questions asked. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, but their hunger's loud. You think of that garlic under their blanket. Still there, still useless. You break the bread, scraping off mold, and share it. The taste bitter but filling. The cow groans, her hunger your own. You add a stick to the fire, the woodpile shrinking. Another forest trip looming. Here's another joke. What's a medieval bandit's favorite tax? The one you pay with your life. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too focused on their crumbs to care. You think of the baker, probably dead. His hut a warning. You'll check Agnes next. Maybe trade the bread for a turnip. The village is dying, and you're dodging death with every step. You pull your cloak tighter, the wool scratching your grimy skin. The wind rattles the door, and you wonder if it's bandits, taxmen, or just winter, laughing at your struggle. The day fades, the hut smoky, the fire's warmth a lie. You tell the kids a story about a hero who outsmarted a lord, but their eyes are heavy, the bread not enough. You're not sure you believe the tale either. The fire pops, and you guard it, your axe by the door. You think of the castle, the Lord's men, the bandits in the shadows. You're trapped, but you're still here, fighting for another day. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, and close your eyes, dreaming of a world without lords or thieves, just fire and food. You're slumped by the fire, its faint glow barely holding back the cold that seeps through your hut's walls. The moldy bread you scavenged from the bakers, remember that grim find, is gone. Its crumbs, a fleeting comfort for your starving family. The kids are curled up, their breaths shallow. The sick ones cough a quiet haunt. Your spouse tends the fire, and grandmother's prayers are a soft drone, mixing with the cow's weak grumbles. Outside, the village is a frozen tomb, but you're thinking of the Lord's castle, where nobles feast while you chew memories of bread. Their winter is a banquet, yours a battle, and the gap between you stings worse than the wind. You stir the fire, the woodpile dangerously low, each stick a reminder of the forest's dangers. You think of the nobles, warm in stone halls, their tables heavy with roasted meat, bread, and wine. You've never seen it, but you've heard servants talk, and the priest's sermons drip with tales of the Lord's generosity to his court. Your stomach twists, not just from hunger but envy. You're gnawing stale dreams while they toast to winter's end. Your cloak, thin as hope, does nothing against the chill, and you wonder how it feels to be warm and full. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval nobles enjoyed lavish feasts, even in winter, with access to stored grains, preserved meats, and imported spices, while peasants starved under feudal taxes and poor harvests. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some lords held fools' feasts, where jesters were fed like kings for a day, a cruel mockery of the hungry outside their gates. Historians still argue whether these feasts were a show of power, or a desperate bid to distract from growing peasant unrest. You glance at the kids, their faces pale, eyes sunken. You gave them the last of the bread, scraping off mold like a surgeon. You think of that dried fish, still hidden, your last card, but not yet. You're holding out for a miracle, maybe a turnip from Agnes, or a crust from someone still alive. You think of the baker, his hut empty, his fate a shadow over the village. You'll check Agnes today, though the thought of begging burns. You'd trade your axe for a noble's scraps, but their gates are locked, their guards as cold as the snow. Speaking of cold, here's a joke. Why did the noble's feast smell so good? Because it was seasoned with peasant tears. You smirk, but it's bitter. The fire's crackle drowning your thoughts. You think of the church, where the priest dines better than you. His tithes your grain. You went once, hoping for charity, but got a sermon about patience instead. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for a noble's leftovers, feeling foolish but desperate. The cow shifts, her ribs stark. You wish you could feed her, but she's as hungry as you, her milk a summer memory. You think of the Lord's men who took your stool for taxes. Remember that theft? They're probably at the castle now, eating while you starve. You heard a rumor? The Lord's hosting a midwinter feast with venison and ale. You'd crawl through snow for a bone from their table, but you'd get a whip for trying. You pull your cloak tighter, its damp wool scratching your grimy skin. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, but their hunger's loud. You want to promise them food, but words feel like lies in this hut. The fire's low, the hut smoky, your eyes stinging. Your spouse catches your eye, their face etched with the same envy. "They don't know hunger," they whisper, and you nod, picturing the Lord's table, its warmth a world away. You think of the village, where some still dream of noble charity. Agnes once said the Lord gave bread last winter, but you don't believe it. Lords don't share. You think of bandits, who'd rob the castle if they could. You'd join them, but you're too weak, your axe too dull. Here's another joke. What's a noble's favorite winter game? Tossing bones to dogs while peasants beg. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too tired to care. You tell them a story about a thief who stole a lord's feast, but their eyes are heavy, the hunger too real. You're not sure you believe the tale either. The fire pops, a small spark, and you guard it, the only warmth you own. You think of the castle, its lights mocking your dark hut. You'll beg from Agnes, maybe trade a charm for a turnip. The day creeps in, the light gray and cruel. You pull your boots on, the leather cracked, your toes numb. You grab your axe, the cold biting your hands, and step out, the wind carrying the faint echo of noble laughter. You're starving, but you're alive, and you'll fight for crumbs while they feast. You think of the kids, their frail warmth, and vow to find something, anything to keep them going. You trudge toward Agnes's, the snow swallowing your steps, the castle's shadow a taunt you can't escape. You're hunched by the fire, its weak glow a flickering lifeline in your smoky hut. The kids are asleep, their breaths faint. The sick ones cough, a soft ghost in the dark. Your spouse guards the flames, and grandmother's prayers are a low hum, blending with the cow's weary sighs. The moldy bread from the baker's, remember that stolen crumb, is long gone, and your stomach's a knot of hunger. Outside, the village lies buried in snow, and you're counting days, praying for spring's warmth that feels like a myth. Winter's endless, a cruel jailer, and you're trapped in its grip, hoping to outlast the cold that's already claimed too many. You poke the fire, the woodpile a pitiful stack, each stick a reminder of the forest's risks. You think of spring, when the fields turn green and the stream runs clear. It's a dream, distant as the Lord's feasts. Remember those tales of venison and wine? You're starving, your cloak useless, your boots leaking. The kids' faces are gaunt, their eyes dull, and you wonder if they'll see flowers again. You count the weeks since the first snow. 8, maybe 9. Time's a blur in this gray gloom, and spring's promise feels like a lie told to children. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval winters often lasted from November to March, with the Little Ice Age making them harsher, delaying planting and causing famines that could wipe out entire villages. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some peasants marked time by carving notches on door frames, though snowed-in huts made even that a chore. Historians still argue whether the wait for spring drove more deaths from starvation or despair in these relentless winters. You glance at the kids, their frail bodies curled under a tattered blanket. You gave them the last of the bread, mold and all, but it wasn't enough. You think of that dried fish, still hidden, your final gamble, but you're not there yet. You're holding out for Agnes, who might have a turnip or a miracle from the village. You think of the baker, his hut empty, a warning of what waits if spring doesn't come. You'll try Agnes today, though begging's a wound to your pride. You'd trade your axe for a sprout of green, but the snow's too thick, the ground too hard. Speaking of hard, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant dream of spring? Because even the mud looked tastier than snow. You smirk, but it's grim. The fires crackle a faint comfort. You think of the church, where the priest preaches about eternal spring in heaven. You went once, hoping for hope, but got a tithe demand instead. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for a warm breeze, feeling foolish, but desperate. The cow shifts, her ribs stark, her hunger your own. You wish you could promise her grass, but promises are as empty as your grain sack. You think of the Lord's men who took your stool for taxes? Remember that theft? They're warm in the castle, while you count days in the dark. You heard a rumor, the Lord's planting early, with grain you'll never see. You'd crawl through snow for a seed, but his guards would laugh before they struck. You pull your cloak tighter, its damp wool a mockery. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, but their hunger's loud. You want to tell them spring's coming, but the words stick, heavy as the snow outside. The hut's smoky, your eyes stinging. Your spouse catches your eye, their face etched with the same longing. It'll thaw, they whisper, but it's more prayer than truth. You think of the village, where some still mark days, hoping for a sign. Agnes once said she saw a bud last winter, but you don't believe it. Winter lies. You think of bandits, who don't wait for spring, their blades sharp in the snow. You're too weak to fight, your axe too dull, but you'll face them if it means food. Here's another joke. What's a medieval peasant's favorite calendar? The one where winter's just one day. You chuckle, but it's hollow, the kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story about a sun that melted winter in a night, but their eyes are heavy, the cold too real. You're not sure you believe the tale either. The fire pops, a small spark, and you guard it, your only warmth. You think of the stream, frozen solid, no fish, no water. You'll melt snow again, a slow fight for every drop. The day creeps in, the light gray and cruel. You pull your boots on, the leather cracked, your toes numb. You grab your axe, the cold biting your hands, and step out, the wind a knife against your grimy skin. You're heading to Agnes's, praying for a turnip or a kind word. The snow swallows your steps, the village a graveyard of buried hopes. You think of the kids, their frail warmth, and vow to find something to keep them alive. Spring's a whisper, but you're still here, fighting for one more day in winter's endless night. You're gathered by the fire, its faint glow casting shadows that dance on your hut's smoky walls. The cold's a weight, pressing through your thin cloak, and the kids are huddled close, their breaths faint. The sick ones cough, a soft reminder of winter's grip. Your spouse adds a stick to the flames, the woodpile shrinking fast, and grandmother's prayers are a quiet hum, almost lost in the cow's weary sighs. Your stomach's a hollow scream, that dried fish still hidden but whispering temptation. To distract from the hunger, you start a story, spinning tales of ghosts and heroes by the firelight, hoping to steal a moment from winter's misery. You clear your throat, voice rough, and begin a tale about a knight who fought a frost demon, his sword glowing like the sun. The kids' eyes widen, their hunger forgotten for a second, even the sick one leaning closer. You describe the demon's icy claws, the knight's courage, and a village saved by a single flame. Your spouse smirks, knowing you're making it up, but they play along, tossing in a detail about the demon's howl. The fire pops, as if approving, and for a moment, the hut feels less like a tomb. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Storytelling was a key pastime in medieval winters, with oral tales of heroes, saints, and monsters shared in huts to pass long, dark nights and ease fears of famine and cold. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers believed telling ghost stories could scare off real spirits, like a verbal charm to guard the hearth. Historians still argue whether these tales were more about entertainment or a way to process the terrors of winter's isolation. You shift on the straw, the cold biting your bones. You think of Agnes, who spins better stories than you, her voice carrying whole villages in her words. You plan to beg at her hut today. Remember that hope for a turnip? But snow blocked your path, and you turned back. You weave her into the tale, making her a wise woman who aids the night with a magic herb. The kids giggle, a rare sound, and you savor it, though your stomach growls, mocking the story's warmth. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a story no one wants to tell. Speaking of silence, here's a joke. Why did the medieval ghost join Storytime? Because he wanted a chilling cameo. You chuckle and the kids smile, their faces pale but alive. You keep going, adding a twist. The knight's sword breaks, but he defeats the demon with a burning log. You gesture at the fire, its glow weak but defiant. You think of the forest, where you'll go again, risking wolves and frost for wood. You told a story there once to keep your courage. Remember that lonely trek? It didn't find food, but it kept you moving. The kids beg for another tale, and you start one about a thief who stole winter's heart, a girl with a laugh like spring. You're half making it up, half remembering grandmother's stories. Her voice stronger then. You glance at her now, her eyes closed, lips still. You weave her into the story, a grandmother who knows winter's secrets. The kids listen. The sick ones cough quieter, but their hunger's a shadow no tale can banish. You think of that garlic under their blanket, still there, still useless. You wish stories could fill bellies, but they only fill time. The hut's smoky, the fire's fumes stinging your eyes. You think of the Lord's castle, where minstrels sing for feasts. Remember those rumors of venison and ale? Your stories are free, but they're all you've got. You think of the church, the priest's tales of saints and sin, more demand than comfort. You tried his stories, but they left you cold, his tithes a heavier burden than hunger. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for the fire to last, feeling foolish, but desperate. The cow shifts, her hunger your own, her ribs a grim echo of your kids. Here's another joke. What's a medieval storyteller's worst fear? A crowd that's hungry for food, not tales. You laugh, but it's hollow. The kid's eyes heavy now. You finish the thief's story, her victory bringing a dawn that melts snow. They clap, a weak sound, and you feel a spark of pride, though it fades fast. The fire's low, the woodpile a warning. You think of the village, where stories are currency. Agnes might trade a tale for a turnip. You'll try tomorrow, if the snow lets you. The night deepens. The hut dark, but for the fire's glow. You tell one last tale, softer, about a star that guides a lost child home. The kids drift off, their breath slow, the sick one calm for now. You're not sure you believe the story, but it soothes them, and that's enough. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you guard it, your axe by the door. You think of the forest, the castle, the church. All stories of their own, none as urgent as yours. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kids' warmth faint, and close your eyes, dreaming of a tale where winter ends. You're crouched by the fire, its frail light flickering in your smoky hut, the cold clawing through the walls like an uninvited guest. The kids are asleep, their breaths shallow. The sick one's cough a faint echo you can't ignore. Your spouse guards the flames, and grandmother's prayers are a soft murmur, blending with the cow's weak huffs. Your hands throbbing, a cut from your last forest trip. Remember that axe slip? Now red and swollen. You're facing medieval medicine, a grim mix of leeches and herbs, and you're praying it doesn't kill you faster than the wound. Winter's already got you by the throat, and now this. You prod the cut, wincing as it pulses, hot despite the chill. The fire's warmth doesn't reach it, and you're scared. Infection's a word you don't know, but you've seen what it does. Last winter, the miller lost a finger to a festering scratch, and he's lucky it wasn't his life. You think of the healer, his bag of bones and weeds, but his visit for your kid's cough, remember that smelly paste, cost you a promise you can't keep. You've got no coin, no chickens, just that dried fish you're hiding, and you're not sure it's worth trading for his guesses. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine relied on herbal remedies, bloodletting, and prayer, with little understanding of infection, often doing more harm than good in unsanitary conditions. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some healers used spider webs to dress wounds, believing they stopped bleeding, though they mostly just added dirt. Historians still argue whether faith in these treatments or the lack of proper care caused more deaths in winter's disease-prone months. You glance at the kids, their faces pale in the firelight, the sick one quieter but frail. You want to keep this cut from them, but your spouse notices, their eyes narrowing. "Show me," they whisper, and you do, the wound ugly in the dim glow. They frown, then dig out a scrap of cloth, tearing it to wrap your hand. It's filthy, like everything here, but it's all you've got. You think of the stream, frozen solid, no way to wash the wound. You'd give your axe for clean water, but you're stuck with snow and hope. Speaking of hope, here's a joke. Why did the medieval healer carry leeches? Because they were his best success story. You smirk, but it's grim, your hand throbbing harder. You think of Agnes, who knows herbs, maybe something for this cut. You plan to beg at her hut. Remember that turnip dream? But snow and fear kept you inside. You'll try tomorrow, if your hand lets you grip the axe. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did a wound take him, or the cold? You don't want to know, but you need to. You think of the healer's last visit, his muttering about bad humors and that foul paste. You've still got some, smeared on your kid's chest, doing nothing but stinking. You consider rubbing it on your cut, but the smell stops you. Garlic's bad enough, still under their blanket, a useless charm. You mutter a prayer, not to saints, but to the fire, begging it to keep you whole. The cow shifts, her ribs stark, her hunger a mirror of yours. You wish you could feed her, but you're all starving, and now this wound's another mouth to feed. The hut's smoky, your eyes stinging as you poke the fire. You think of the Lord's castle where physicians use knives and wine, not leeches. You'd crawl there for a clean bandage, but their gates are locked, their mercy a myth. You think of the church, the priests talk of miracles. You tried praying for your kid's cough, but it's still here, and your hands know better. You wrap the cloth tighter, the pain sharp, and wonder if you'll lose the hand, or worse. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their fear. Here's another joke. What's a medieval wound's favorite song? Bleed it out. You chuckle, but it's hollow, the pain drowning your thoughts. You tell the kids a story, keeping your hand still, about a healer who turned wounds to stars. They listen, eyes heavy, the fire's glow a small comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them, and that's enough. The woodpile's low, another forest trip looming, but your hand's a traitor now. You think of Agnes, her herb knowledge, maybe a leaf to save you. The night deepens, the hut dark but for the fire's flicker. Your spouse watches you, their worry a weight. You nod, pretending strength, but the wound's heat tells the truth. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you guard it. Your axe useless against this enemy. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all worlds away from your pain. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where wounds heal, where winter spares you one more fight. You're slumped by the fire, its dim glow a fragile pulse in your smoky hut, the cold sneaking through cracks like a thief. Your hand throbs, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip? Wrapped in a filthy rag, pulsing with heat. The kids are asleep, their breaths faint, the sick one's cough a soft shadow. Your spouse tends the flames, and grandmother's prayers are a weary hum, mixing with the cow's weak grunts. The village is a frozen wasteland, but whispers of rebellion stir. Peasants like you, fed up with the Lord's taxes and the priest's tithes, talking of fighting back. You're starving, wounded, and scared, but the idea of revolt sparks something in your chest, even if it's just a flicker. You poke the fire, the woodpile a sad stack, each stick a reminder of the forest's dangers. You think of the Lord's men, who took your stool for taxes. Remember that theft? And the priest, who demands coins you don't have. You heard a rumor at the church last week, hushed voices by the graveyard. A few villagers, led by the blacksmith, planning to hide grain, maybe burn a tax cart. You're not sure you believe it. Rebellion's a noose around your neck. But the thought of fighting back, of keeping your last crumbs, warms you more than the fire. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Peasant revolts, like the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, often brewed in winter, when hunger and taxes pushed villagers to the edge, though most uprisings were crushed by lords' armies. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Some rebels smeared mud on their faces, thinking it hid them from the Lord's spies, though it mostly just froze their cheeks. Historians still argue whether these revolts were driven more by starvation or the spark of defiance against feudal oppression. You glance at the kids, their faces gaunt, the sick one quieter but frail. You hid your wound from them, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain sharp, and wonder if you could swing an axe against a taxman. You're weak, but anger's a fuel hunger can't steal. You think of the blacksmith, his hammer silent now, his forge cold. He's big, tough, but even he's starving. If he's plotting, maybe there's hope, or just a quicker death. You think of Agnes, who might know more. She hears everything. Her hut a crossroads of gossip. Speaking of gossip, here's a joke. Why did the peasant join the revolt? Because he was tired of paying taxes with his last potato. You smirk, but it's grim, the fire's crackle drowning your thoughts. You think of the baker's empty hut. Did he join a plot, or just die? You'll ask Agnes tomorrow if your hand lets you walk. You think of that dried fish, still hidden, your last hope, but maybe a bribe for the blacksmith's trust. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for courage, feeling foolish, but desperate. The cow shifts, her ribs stark, her hunger your own. You think of the Lord's castle, its walls mocking your rebellion dreams. His men are armed, fed, warm, everything you're not. You heard a rumor, the Lord's doubling taxes, blaming the snow for his losses. You'd burn his granary if you could, but you're one man, wounded with a dull axe. You think of the church, the priest's sermons calling revolt a sin. You went once, hoping for mercy, but got a tithe box instead. You wrap your hand tighter, the rag damp with sweat, and wonder if defiance is worth the noose. The hut's smoky, your eyes stinging. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. Heard anything? They whisper, and you nod, sharing the blacksmith's rumor. Their jaw tightens, but they say nothing. Hope's dangerous. You think of the village, where whispers spread like frost. Agnes might know names, maybe even plans. You'll beg at her hut, trade a story for news. Remember those tales by the fire? The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your hand, not wanting their fear. You want to promise them freedom, but words are cheap in winter. Here's another joke. What's a rebel peasant's favorite weapon? A pitchfork, because it's great for hay and lords. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a village that rose and won. They listen, eyes heavy, the fire's glow a small comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The woodpile's low, another forest trip looming, but your hand's a traitor. You think of the blacksmith, his hammer a call to fight. The night deepens, the hut dark but for the fire's flicker. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending strength, but the wound's heat and the revolt's risk weigh you down. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you guard it, your axe by the door. You think of the castle, the church, the village, all teetering on whispers of change. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where rebellion wins, where winter spares you one more fight. You're hunched by the fire, its faint glow a whisper of warmth in your smoky hut, the cold seeping through like a debt collector. Your hands throbbing, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip? Burning under its filthy rag. The kids are asleep, their breaths thin. The sick ones cough a soft ghost. Your spouse guards the flames, and grandmother's prayers are a tired hum, blending with the cow's feeble grunts. She's worse today, her eyes dull, ribs sharper than your hunger. Your family's starving, but the cow's your plow, your future, and she's fading fast. Winter's killing her too. And if she goes, your hope for spring, already a faint dream, dies with her. You poke the fire, the woodpile a grim reminder of another forest trip you can't make with a wounded hand. The cow's barely standing, her low moans cutting deeper than the wind. You think of summer, when she grazed on clover and gave milk, however little. Now, there's no hay, no scraps, just the same empty grain sack you've checked 100 times. Remember that despair? You'd give your axe to feed her, but you've got nothing, not even that dried fish you're hiding, which you're saving for the kids. The fire crackles, mocking your empty hands. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Livestock were vital to medieval peasants, providing milk, labor, and manure. But winter often killed animals due to lack of fodder, devastating families who relied on them for survival. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Some villagers fed their cows snow-soaked leaves, believing it was winter grass, though it mostly just froze their insides. Historians still argue whether animal deaths or human starvation was the bigger blow to medieval villages during harsh winters. You glance at the cow, her head low, breath shallow. The kids don't know how bad it is. You've kept them from looking too close, but your spouse does. Their eyes meeting yours, heavy with the same fear. You think of the Lord's castle, where stables are stuffed with hay, their oxen fat while your cow starves. You heard a rumor, the Lord slaughtering pigs for his feasts. Remember those tales of venison and ale? While you can't even save one animal, you'd steal a bale for her, but the castle's a fortress, and your hand's too weak to fight. Speaking of weakness, here's a joke. Why did the medieval cow look so sad? Because she knew winter was a real moother. You smirk, but it's grim. The fire's glow too weak to cheer you. You think of Agnes, who might have advice. She's kept a goat alive through worse. You plan to beg at her hut. Remember that turnip hope? But your wound and the snow stopped you. You'll try tomorrow if you can walk. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did his animals die first, or him? You don't want to know, but you need to. You shift on the straw, your hand pulsing, the rag damp with sweat. You think of the healer, his useless paste. Remember that stink on your kid's chest? You're tempted to try it on the cow, but you know it's a fool's hope. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for her strength, feeling foolish but desperate. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, but their hunger's a shadow. You hide your wound, not wanting their fear, and avoid the cow's corner, not wanting their questions. You wish you could promise them milk, but the cow's dry, her life slipping like the fire's last embers. The hut's smoky, your eyes stinging. You think of the church, the priest's talk of God's plan, But no prayers save starving beasts. You tried praying for your kid's cough, but it lingers, and your cows know better. You think of the blacksmith's whispers of revolt. Remember that spark of defiance? If you joined, could you steal hay? You're too weak. Your hand a traitor. You pull your cloak tighter. Its damp wool a mockery. The cow groans, and you flinch, her pain your own. You'd trade your boots for a handful of grass, but winter's a thief, and you're all its victims. Here's another joke. What's a medieval cow's favorite dream? A field where snow tastes like clover. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a cow who outran winter and found a green valley. They listen, eyes heavy. The fires glow a small comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The woodpile's low, the forest a distant threat. You think of Agnes, her goat, her wisdom. Maybe she knows a trick to save your cow. The night deepens, the hut dark but for the fire's flicker. Your spouse watches the cow, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending hope, but her fading breath tells the truth. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you guard it, your axe useless against this loss. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all worlds away from your starving beast. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where cows don't die, where winter spares you one more fight. You wake to a world entombed in snow, the hut's walls groaning under a fresh blanket that's piled high overnight. The fire's a faint ember, barely alive, and the cold's so fierce it feels like your bones are cracking. Your hand throbs, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip? Hot under its grimy rag. The kids are curled up, their breaths weak. The sick ones cough a soft ghost. Your spouse is up, poking the fire, and grandmother's prayers are a thin whisper, lost in the cow's feeble moans. You're all starving, the cow's fading, and now the snow's buried your world, trapping you in a white prison with no way out. You shuffle to the door, your boots leaking, and push against it. It won't budge. Snow's packed it shut, heavy as stone. You shove harder, your wounded hand screaming, and finally crack it open, a cascade of powder spilling in. Outside, the village is gone, just humps of white where huts should be. The air stings your face, and you realize you're stuck, your axe useless against this blizzard's wrath. You think of the forest, Agnes, the baker's empty hut, all unreachable now. Your stomach growls, that dried fish still hidden but calling louder. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval blizzards could bury villages for weeks, cutting off food, wood, and contact, with snowdrifts often killing those who ventured out or collapsed poorly built huts. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some peasants believed snowstorms were witches' curses, so they'd burn sage to melt the storm, though it mostly just smoked out their homes. Historians still argue whether blizzards or the resulting isolation caused more deaths in winter's brutal months. You turn back, the fires glow a weak beacon. Your spouse is digging snow from the doorway, their face grim. "We'll clear it," they say. But you both know it's a losing fight. More snow's falling, fast and thick. The kids stir, eyes wide at the white wall outside. You tell them it's just a big snow, but your voice shakes. The cow's worse, barely standing, her ribs a stark warning. You think of her fading. Remember that fear? And now this snow's sealing her fate and yours. You'd trade your cloak for a clear path, but winter's a jailer, and you're locked in. Speaking of being locked in, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant hate blizzards? Because they turned his hut into a snow globe with no exit. You smirk, but it's grim, your hand pulsing as you grab a broken board to scoop snow. You think of Agnes, buried in her hut, her turnips out of reach. You plan to beg there. Remember that hope? But now you're fighting to keep your door clear. You think of the baker, his hut silent before the storm. Did snow take him or something else? You'll never know. Not today. You and your spouse take turns digging, the snow heavy, your wounded hand a traitor. The kids try to help, their small hands useless, but brave. You think of the Lord's castle, its stone walls laughing at storms, their fires roaring while yours gasps. You heard a rumor. The Lord's men ride through blizzards, collecting taxes in sleds. You'd burn their sleds if you could, but you're trapped. Your axe no match for this white tide. You think of the church, the priests talk of God's will. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered. And now snow's your judge. The hut's smoky, the fire's fumes stinging your eyes. You think of that dried fish, your last hope, but you're not there yet. You're saving it for when the snow wins. You mutter a charm, not for witches, but for the storm to break, feeling foolish but desperate. The cow groans, her breath faint, and you flinch, her hunger your own. You wish you could dig her a path to grass, but the snow's too deep, the world too cruel. The kids huddle by the fire, the sick one quieter, but their fears loud. You hide your wound, not wanting their panic. Here's another joke. What's a medieval snowstorm's favorite trick? Turning your village into a popsicle. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kids too cold to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a boy who tamed a blizzard with a song. They listen, eyes heavy, the fire's glow a small comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The woodpile's low, the forest a lost dream. You think of Agnes, her hut as buried as yours. Maybe she's telling stories too, or praying for the same break. The day drags, the light gray through the snow-choked window. You keep digging, the snow piling back, a relentless foe. Your spouse's hands are raw, your hand a burning pulse. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you guard it, your axe by the door, useless now. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all swallowed by white. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a fire of its own. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where snow melts, where winter spares you one more fight. You're trapped in your hut, the fire a frail spark in a world drowned in snow. The blizzard's fury has buried the door again, despite your digging. Remember that losing fight? The cold's a knife, slicing through your thin cloak, and your hand throbs, that festering cut burning hotter under its grimy rag. The kids huddle by the hearth, their breaths weak. The sick ones cough, a faint shadow. Your spouse guards the flames, and grandmother's prayers are a soft drone. barely audible over the cow's dying wheezes. Time's slipping away, the endless winter gloom making days and nights a blur. You're losing track of everything. Days, hopes, even yourself. In this frozen, dark eternity. You poke the fire, the wood pile nearly gone, each stick a countdown to despair. You try to recall how long it's been since the first snow. 10 weeks? 12? The gray light through the snow-choked window gives no clues. You've carved notches on the doorframe, a habit from your father, but the snow's buried them, and you're too tired to dig. You think of spring, that distant dream. Remember counting days, but it feels like chasing a ghost. Your stomach growls, that dried fish still hidden, a secret you're not ready to use. The cow's ribs are stark, her breath a whisper, and you know she won't last. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants struggled to track time in winter, relying on church bells, sundials, or crude markers. But snow and isolation often left them disoriented, with no clear sense of days or seasons. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers believed the moon's phases controlled winter's length, so they'd howl at it to hurry spring, which mostly just scared the wolves. Historians still argue whether this temporal confusion worsened despair or simply reflected the chaos of winter's hardships. You glance at the kids, their faces pale, eyes dull. They don't ask for food anymore, just stare at the fire as if it holds answers. You think of Agnes, buried in her hut. Remember that turnip hope? And wonder if she's counting days too. You plan to beg there, but the snow's a wall, and your hand's too weak to dig far. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a clock that stopped. Did he lose time, or just life? You'll never know, not now. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for clarity, feeling foolish but desperate to anchor yourself in this timeless void. Speaking of voids, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant lose track of time? Because winter's calendar was just cold, colder, dead. You smirk, but it's grim, your hand pulsing as you shift on the straw. You think of the Lord's castle, where they track days with feasts and candles. Remember those rumors of venison? You'd trade your axe for their hourglass. But you're stuck here, where time's a snowdrift swallowing your notches. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, but their hunger's a loud tick you can't ignore. You hide your wound, not wanting their fear. You think of the church, its bells silent under the snow. They used to mark hours, but now they're as lost as you. The priest's sermons about eternity feel cruel when you can't find today. You tried praying for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered, and time's no kinder. You think of the blacksmith's revolt whispers. Remember that spark? But rebellion needs days, plans, strength you don't have. You pull your cloak tighter, its damp wool a mockery. The cow groans, her breath fading, and you flinch. Her death a marker you don't want to carve. The hut's smoky, your eyes stinging. Your spouse catches your eye, their face etched with the same disorientation. "What day is it?" they whisper, and you shrug, the question a wound. You think of the village, where time's a shared lie. Agnes might know, her story's a kind of clock. You'll dig to her hut when the snow eases, trade a tale for news. The fire's low, the wood pile a warning. You think of that dried fish, your last hope, but you're saving it for when time runs out. The kids huddle closer, the sick one's garlic, still there, still useless, smelling of lost faith. Here's another joke. What's a medieval peasant's favorite clock? The sun when it finally shows up. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a boy who found time in a star's light. They listen, eyes heavy. The fire's glow a small comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The woodpile's gone, the forest a buried dream. You think of Agnes, her hut, a faint hope, maybe a turnip to mark another day. The night deepens, the hut dark but for the fire's flicker. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending you know the hour, but the snow's erased all but now. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you guard it, your axe useless against time's theft. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all lost in this white blur. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where days return, where winter spares you one more fight. You're curled by the fire, its dying embers a faint heartbeat in your snowbound hut, the cold a relentless fist squeezing your bones. Your hands a furnace of pain, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip, swollen under its grimy rag? The kids are asleep, their breaths thin, the sick one's cough a soft specter. Your spouse guards the flames, and grandmother's prayers are a feeble hum, drowned by the cow's fading gasps. The village is buried, time's a blur. Remember those lost notches? And now you're gripped by a new fear. The king's wars, distant but creeping closer, threatening to drag you into a pointless fight. Winter's bad enough, but conscription's a death sentence you can't outrun. You poke the fire, the woodpile gone, just a few twigs left from your last forest haul. You think of the rumors, overheard at the church before the blizzard. The king's fighting some far-off lord, and his men are scouring villages for bodies. Young, old, it doesn't matter. You're no soldier, your hand's useless, and your axe is duller than your hope. You think of spring, that fading dream, but war doesn't wait for thaw. The kids' faces are gaunt, the sick one frail, and you wonder if you'll be torn from them, sent to die in mud for a crown you'll never see. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval kings often drafted peasants for wars, especially in winter, when armies needed men to replace losses, pulling farmers from villages with little training or gear, leading to high death rates. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Some villagers faked lameness to dodge conscription, hobbling dramatically when recruiters came, though a good bribe worked better. Historians still argue whether war levies or winter's hardships killed more peasants in these brutal times. You glance at the kids, their frail forms huddled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain a hot spike, and wonder if it'll save you from the king's men. A crippled peasant's no use in battle. You think of the blacksmith, his revolt whispers. Remember that spark? But war's a bigger beast than lords. He's probably hiding too, his hammer no match for armored knights. You think of Agnes, her hut snowed in, maybe hearing the same rumors. You'd beg for her advice, but the snow's a wall, and your hand's a traitor. Speaking of traitors, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant dread the king's call? Because his only armor was a bad attitude. You smirk, but it's grim. The fires crackle a faint comfort. You think of that dried fish, still hidden, your last hope, but no bribe for recruiters. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for invisibility, feeling foolish, but desperate. The cow's breath is barely there, her ribs a grim clock ticking down. You wish you could save her. Remember that fading plow? But war's shadow makes her loss feel small. You'd trade your boots for a quiet village, but the king's reach is long. You think of the lord's castle, where knights train for war, their bellies full. Remember those feast rumors? They'll ride out, leaving you to fill their ranks. You heard a rumor. The king's men are close, maybe a day's ride, seeking men and grain. You've got neither, just a festering hand and starving kids. You think of the church, the priest's sermons blessing the king's cause. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered, and war's no kinder. You pull your cloak tighter, its damp wool a mockery, the cold laughing at your fear. The hut's smoky, your eyes stinging. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. They won't take you, they whisper, but it's more defiance than truth. You think of the village, where fear spreads like frost. Agnes might know more, her gossip a shield. You'll dig to her hut when the snow eases, trade a story for news. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their panic. You want to promise them safety, but war's a thief, and words are cheap. Here's another joke. What's a medieval conscript's favorite battle cry? I'd rather be plowing. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a boy who tricked a king's recruiter with a limp. They listen, eyes heavy. The fires glow a small comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The wood's gone, the forest a buried dream. You think of Agnes, her hut a faint hope, maybe a trick to dodge the draft. The night deepens, the hut dark but for the fire's flicker. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending courage, but the wound's heat and war's threat weigh you down. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you guard it, your axe useless against this fate. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all pawns in a king's game. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where wars forget you, where winter spares you one more fight. You're huddled by the fire, its last embers fading in your snowbound hut, the cold a relentless claw gripping your bones. Your hand burns, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip? Swollen and hot under its filthy rag. The kids are asleep, their breaths faint. The sick one's cough a soft haunt. Your spouse guards the flames, and grandmother's prayers are a weary hum, lost in the cow's dying wheezes. The blizzard's eased, but you're still trapped. The village a frozen grave. You're out of everything, wood, food, hope, except that dried fish. your last treasure. You're bartering for survival now, ready to trade your axe, your pride, anything for a handful of grain to keep your family alive. You poke the fire, the wood gone, just a twig left from your forest haul? Remember that desperate trip? You think of the fish, hidden under the straw, its salty promise a weight in your chest. You've held off, but the kids' gaunt faces and the cow's fading breath say it's time. You think of Agnes, her hut still buried, maybe hiding a turnip or grain. You'd trade your axe for it, though it's your only tool. The village is a ghost town, everyone hoarding or dead, and you're no traitor, but hunger's a cruel teacher, and you're learning fast. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants often bartered in winter, trading tools, clothes, or labor for food when coin was scarce, though desperation drove unfair deals that favored the few with surplus. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers traded cursed items, like a cracked pot, claiming it held luck, hoping to trick a meal out of the gullible. Historians still argue whether bartering prolonged survival or deepened mistrust in starving villages. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain a hot spike, and wonder if you could still swing the axe to trade it. You think of Agnes, who's bartered before. She got a turnip for a story once, her voice worth more than gold. You planned to dig to her hut. Remember that snowbound hope? But your hand's weak, and the path still thick. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did he trade his last loaf, or just die? Speaking of dying, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant barter his axe? Because hunger cuts deeper than steel. You smirk, but it's grim. The fires crackle a faint comfort. You think of that fish, your last card. You could trade it to Agnes, maybe get grain, or the blacksmith, if he's still plotting revolt. Remember those whispers? A fish might buy his trust, or a scrap of hay for the cow. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for a good deal, feeling foolish but desperate. The cow's breath is barely there, her ribs a grim clock. You wish you could trade for her life, but winter's a thief, and you're running out of goods. You think of the Lord's castle, where bartering's a game for nobles, trading furs for wine. Remember those feast rumors? They've got no need for your fish. Their granaries full while you beg. You heard a rumor. The Lord's men are bartering with the king's recruiters, trading grain for men to fight. You'd trade your boots to stay here, but conscription's a deal you can't refuse. You think of the church, the priest's tithes a forced trade, your soul for his bread, if he'd give it. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered, and bartering's your only prayer now. The hut smoky, your eyes stinging. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. What's left to trade? They whisper. And you point to the axe, the fish, your pride. They nod, knowing the cost. You think of the village, where bartering's a last stand. Agnes might have grain, her hut a faint hope. You'll dig tomorrow, if your hand allows. Trade the fish for life. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their fear. You want to promise them food, but deals are shaky in winter. Here's another joke. What's a medieval trader's favorite deal? Your axe for a crumb, no refunds. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a girl who traded a song for a feast. They listen, eyes heavy. The fire's glow a small comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The wood's gone, the forest a buried dream. You think of Agnes, her bartering savvy, maybe a grain to save you. The night deepens, the hut dark, but for the fire's flicker. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending strength, but the wound's heat and hunger's weight crush you. The fire crackles, a small defiance, and you guard it, your axe a bargaining chip now. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all markets of their own, none as desperate as yours. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where trades are fair, where winter spares you one more fight. You're slumped by the fire, its last spark a dying whisper in your snow-choked hut, the cold a relentless weight crushing your spirit. Your hands a throbbing inferno, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip, swollen and angry under its filthy rag. The kids are asleep, their breaths barely there. The sick one's cough a faint ghost. Your spouse guards the embers, and grandmother's prayers are a soft hum, drowned by the cow's final shuddering sighs. The snow's eased, but you're still trapped, the village a frozen void. You watch the kids, their small forms playing in the snow before hunger stole their strength. Their games a fleeting spark of joy you're desperate to hold on to, even as winter buries it. You poke the embers, the wood gone, just ash left from your forest haul. Remember that desperate trek? You think of the kids outside weeks ago, before the worst blizzards, laughing as they tossed snow, their skinny arms shaping crude forts. Now, they're too weak, their faces gaunt, eyes dull. You think of that dried fish, still hidden, your last hope, but you're saving it for when joy's gone too. You imagine them playing again, their giggles a shield against hunger, but the snow's too deep, their bodies too frail. You'd trade your axe for one more laugh, but winter's a thief, and plays a luxury you can't afford. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval children played simple games in winter, like snowball fights or sliding on frozen streams, using play to cope with hunger and cold, though malnutrition often left them too weak by season's end. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some kids carved snow saints, tiny figures they prayed to for spring, though the snow melted their prayers faster than the sun. Historians still argue whether these games boosted morale or hid the grim reality of winter's toll on the young. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain a hot blade, and wonder if you could still build a snow fort with them. You think of Agnes, whose grandkid used to play with yours, their laughter echoing by the stream before it froze. You plan to dig to her hut, remember that bartering hope? But your hand's weak, and the snow's still thick. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did his kids stop playing first, or him? Speaking of silence, here's a joke. Why did the medieval kid love snow games? Because snowballs were free, unlike food. You smirk, but it's grim. The fire's ash a faint comfort. You think of that fish, your last card. You could trade it to Agnes for a turnip. Maybe let the kids play with it first, a grim toy. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for their laughter, feeling foolish but desperate. The cow's gone now, her last breath an hour ago. Her ribs a stark clock stopped forever. You wish you could have saved her, remember that fading plow? But her death's another game winter won. You think of the Lord's castle, where noble kids play with wooden swords, their bellies full. Remember those feast rumors? They've got no hunger to hide. Their game's a world away. You heard a rumor. The Lord's kids are skating on a frozen moat, while yours can't stand. You'd trade your boots for their energy, but you're trapped. Your hand a traitor. You think of the church. The priests talk of joyful suffering. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered. And the kids' games are just memories now, buried like the village. The hut's smoky, your eyes stinging. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. They'll play again, they whisper, but it's more defiance than truth. You think of the village, where kids' laughter once broke the silence. Agnes's grandkid might still try, her hut a faint hope. You'll dig tomorrow, trade the fish for news, maybe a turnip for a game. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their fear. You want to promise them snowballs, but winter's deals are cruel. Here's another joke. What's a medieval kid's favorite snow game? Starving tag. Nobody wins. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a boy who built a snow castle and lived like a king. They listen, eyes heavy. The fire's ash a small comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The wood's gone, the forest a buried dream. You think of Agnes, her grandkid, her stories, maybe a game to share. The night deepens, the hut dark but for the embers glow. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending hope, but the wound's heat and the cow's death crush you. The fire's out, a final loss, and you guard its ash, your axe a useless toy now. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all worlds where plays a stranger. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where kids laugh, where winter spares you one more fight. You're slumped in your hut, the fire gone, its ashes cold as the snow that seals you in. Your hand's a throbbing furnace, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip, swollen and searing under its grimy rag. The kids are asleep, their breaths barely there. The sick one's cough a faint wisp. Your spouse sits close, their face grim in the dim light filtering through the snow-choked window. Grandmother's prayers are silent now, her strength spent, and the cow's dead. Remember that final breath? Her ribs a stark monument to loss. The village is a frozen void, but you're dreaming of monasteries, those distant beacons of knowledge where monks huddle in warm scriptoriums, their bellies full while you starve in the dark. You shift on the straw, the cold biting your bones, your cloak useless. You think of the monastery, miles away, its stone walls defying winter, its fires roaring. You've heard stories, monks copying books, their ink flowing like your hunger never will. They've got bread, cheese, maybe ale, while you've got nothing but that dried fish, still hidden, a secret you're clinging to. You'd trade your axe for one night in their warmth, one bite of their loaf, but you're trapped here, your hand too weak to dream of walking. The kids' faces are gaunt, their eyes closed, and you envy the monks' full tables, their lives of parchment and prayer. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval monasteries were centers of learning, preserving texts and producing manuscripts, often with food and warmth secured by church wealth, making them oases for monks while peasants starved. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some monks brewed fasting ale, a thick beer to sustain them through Lent, claiming it wasn't breaking their vows, though it definitely warmed their spirits. Historians still argue whether monasteries helped nearby villages with charity or hoarded their wealth during winter's worst months. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain a hot spike, and wonder if a monk could heal it with their herbs and prayers. You think of Agnes, snowed in, maybe dreaming of the same monastery. She once said they gave her bread, years ago. You plan to dig to her hut. Remember that bartering hope? But the snow's too deep, your hand too frail. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did he try for the monastery or just die? Speaking of dying, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant envy monks? Because their vows of poverty still included dinner. You smirk, but it's grim. The cold a heavier weight than hunger. You think of that fish, your last card. You could trade it to Agnes for news, maybe a rumor of monastic charity. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for a monk's kindness, feeling foolish but desperate. The cow's gone, her death a wound deeper than your hand. You wish you could have saved her, remember that plow? But winter's a thief, and monasteries don't share with the dead. You think of the Lord's castle, its feasts mocking your hunger. Remember those rumors of venison? The monks are closer to them, dining on church tithes while you scrape ash. You heard a rumor, the monasteries sending grain to the Lord, not the village. You'd crawl there, beg at their gates, but your hand's a traitor, and the snow's a wall. You think of the church, the priests talk of holy charity. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered, and the monks' scriptoriums feel as far as heaven. You pull your cloak tighter, its damp wool a mockery, the cold laughing at your envy. The hut's dark, the air thick with loss. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. They've got warmth, they whisper, meaning the monks, and you nod, the dream a shared ache. You think of the village, where monastery rumors are a faint hope. Agnes might know more, her gossip a lifeline. You'll dig to her hut when the snow thaws, trade the fish for news. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their fear. You want to promise them bread, but monks don't walk through blizzards. Here's another joke. What's a monk's favorite winter task? Writing scriptures by a fire while you freeze. You chuckle, but it's hollow, the kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a monk who shared his loaf with the village. They listen, eyes heavy, the ash a grim comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The woods gone, the forest a buried dream. You think of Agnes, her stories, her hope, maybe a whisper of monastic alms. The night deepens, the hut a tomb but for the kids' faint warmth. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending hope, but the wound's heat and the cow's death crush you. The fire's out, the cold a final king. You think of the monastery, its glowing scriptoriums, a world apart. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where monks share, where winter spares you one more fight. You're curled in your hut, the fire long dead, its ashes a cold grave under the weight of snow that locks you in. Your hands a searing torment, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip, pulsing with fever under its grimy rag. The kids are asleep, their breaths faint. The sick ones cough, a soft specter. Your spouse sits close, their eyes hollow in the dim gray filtering through the snow-choked window. Grandmother's silent, her prayers spent, and the cow's gone. Remember that final breath? Her ribs a stark shrine to loss. The village is a frozen void, and now whispers of witches and scapegoats haunt the air, neighbors blaming neighbors for winter's wrath. You're starving, wounded, and scared, but suspicion's a new shadow creeping into your hut. You shift on the straw, the cold gnawing your bones, your cloak a useless rag. You think of the village, where fears turned sour. Before the last blizzard, you heard Agnes muttering. Her neighbor, old Watt, blamed for the snow, his limp called a witch's mark. You scoffed then, but now, in the dark, you wonder, is winter a curse? You're no witch, but your hand's fever could mark you as cursed. You think of that dried fish, still hidden, your last hope, but would you trade it to silence a pointed finger? The kids' faces are gaunt, their eyes closed, and you dread the day they hear the whispers. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval villages often turned to scapegoating during crises like winter famines, accusing outsiders or odd neighbors of witchcraft to explain suffering, with trials sometimes leading to executions. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers threw witch stones into fires, believing the smoke would reveal a hexer, though it mostly just choked everyone. Historians still argue whether these witch hunts were driven more by fear of the supernatural or desperation to control a starving community. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain a burning blade, and wonder if a fevered hand looks like witchcraft to scared eyes. You think of Agnes, snowed in, maybe whispering accusations herself. She's sharp, but hunger twists tongues. You plan to dig to her hut. Remember that bartering hope? But the snow's too deep, your hand too weak. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Was he blamed or just dead? You're afraid to ask. Speaking of fear, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant fear witches? Because they thought snow was just dandruff from a hex. You smirk, but it's grim. The cold a heavier weight than suspicion. You think of that fish, your last card. You could trade it to Agnes. Maybe buy her silence if she's pointing fingers. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for trust, feeling foolish but desperate. The cow's gone, her death a mark against you. Some might say you cursed her. You wish you could have saved her. Remember that plow? But winter's a witch, and you're all her prey. You think of the Lord's castle, where witches are just tales to scare servants, their feasts untouched by blame. Remember those rumors of venison? They don't need scapegoats. Their granaries full while you starve. You heard a rumor? The Lord's men are sniffing for witches, using fear to keep villages quiet. You'd trade your boots to stay clear, but your hand's a beacon now. You think of the church, the priest's sermons calling witchcraft a sin. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered. And now you're dodging human curses too. The hut's dark, the air thick with dread. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. They're scared, they whisper, meaning the village, and you nod, the fear a shared ache. You think of the village, where whispers spread like frost. Agnes might know who's blamed, her gossip a double-edged blade. You'll dig to her hut when the snow thaws, trade the fish for safety. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their fear. You want to promise them peace, but witch hunts are as cruel as hunger. Here's another joke. What's a medieval witch's favorite spell? One that conjures bread, not blame. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a girl who outsmarted a witch hunt with kindness. They listen, eyes heavy, the ash a grim comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The wood's gone, the forest a buried dream. You think of Agnes, her stories, her danger, maybe a way to dodge the whispers. The night deepens, the hut a tomb, but for the kids' faint warmth. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending courage, but the wound's heat and the village's fear crush you. The fire's out, the cold a final judge. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all breeding grounds for blame. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where no one's cursed, where winter spares you one more fight. You're slumped in your hut, the fire long gone, its ashes a cold scar in the snowbound dark. Your hands a throbbing blaze, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip, swollen and feverish under its grimy rag? The kids are asleep, their breaths faint, the sick one's cough a soft ghost. Your spouse sits close, their eyes hollow in the dim gray seeping through the snow-choked window. Grandmother's silent, her prayers exhausted, and the cow's dead. Remember that final breath? Her ribs a grim monument to loss. The village is a frozen tomb, but you're craving the fleeting warmth of ale, a weak brew that's more comfort than cure. You'd trade your axe for a sip, anything to dull the hunger and fear clawing at your chest. You shift on the straw, the cold biting your bones, your cloak a useless rag. You think of the alehouse, shuttered now, its barrels dry since the snows came. Last autumn, you'd sit there, sipping watery ale, its bitter warmth a brief escape from the fields. Now, you're dreaming of that taste, a ghost of better days when your stomach didn't scream. You think of that dried fish, still hidden, your last hope, but you'd trade it for a jug of ale, something to blur the pain in your hand and the whispers of witches. Remember those village suspicions? The kids' faces are gaunt, their eyes closed, and you wish for a sip to share, a moment of warmth in this endless freeze. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants drank weak ale daily, often safer than water, and providing some calories. But winter shortages made even this scarce, leaving villages parched and desperate. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some brewed snow ale, fermenting melted snow with old grain, which tasted like regret but numbed the cold. Historians still argue whether ale's slight nourishment or its drunken relief helped more in winter's brutal grip. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain a burning spike, and imagine ale dulling it, if only for an hour. You think of Agnes, snowed in, maybe hoarding a flask. She's traded stories for ale before, her voice a better coin than yours. You plan to dig to her hut. Remember that bartering hope? But the snow's too deep, your hand too weak. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did he drink his last ale, or just die? Speaking of dying, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant love ale? Because it was the only thing warmer than his dreams? You smirk, but it's grim, the cold a heavier weight than thirst. You think of that fish, your last card. You could trade it to Agnes for a sip, maybe a story to chase the fear. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for a brew, feeling foolish but desperate. The cow's gone, her death a wound deeper than your hand. Some blamed witches, but you blame winter. You wish you could have saved her. Remember that plow? But ale's a kinder ghost than memory. You think of the Lord's castle, where ale flows like rivers, their feasts drunk on plenty. Remember those rumors of venison and wine? They've got barrels while you've got snow. You heard a rumor. The Lord's men are brewing for the king's recruiters, toasting to war while you starve. You'd trade your boots for a mug, but your hand's a traitor, and the castle's a fortress. You think of the church, the priest's sermons condemning drunkenness. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered, and ale's a prayer you'd trust more. The hut's dark, the air thick with despair. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. Remember the alehouse? They whisper, and you nod, the memory a shared ache. You think of the village, where ale's a faded legend. Agnes might have a drop, her hut a faint hope. You'll dig tomorrow, trade the fish for a sip, maybe news. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their fear. You want to promise them warmth, but ale's a dream as thin as snow. Here's another joke. What's a medieval brewer's favorite toast? To winter. May it freeze everyone but me. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a man who brewed ale from starlight. They listen, eyes heavy, the ash a grim comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The wood's gone, the forest a buried dream. You think of Agnes, her stories, her flask, maybe a sip to share. The night deepens. The hut a tomb, but for the kids' faint warmth. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending hope. But the wound's heat and hunger's weight crush you. The fire's out, the cold a final king. You think of the alehouse, its warmth a world apart. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where ale flows, where winter spares you one more fight. You're slumped in your hut, the fire a distant memory, its ashes cold as the snow that traps you in this frozen tomb. Your hands a throbbing inferno, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip? Swollen and feverish under its grimy rag. The kids are asleep, their breaths faint. The sick ones cough a soft wisp. Your spouse sits close, their eyes sunken in the dim gray filtering through the snow-choked window. Grandmother's silent, her strength gone, and the cow's dead. Remember that final breath? Her ribs a grim relic of loss. The village is buried, but a faint thaw stirs, the rivers cracking open, bringing new dangers, floods and bandits, as winter's grip loosens. You're clinging to that dried fish, your last hope, praying it sees you through this shifting peril. You shift on the straw, the cold biting your bones, your cloak a useless rag. You hear a drip outside, the snow melting, the stream groaning under its icy shell. It's a sign of spring, but not the kind you dreamed of. Remember counting days? The thaw means floods, swollen rivers washing away paths. Maybe your hut. Worse, bandits thrive in chaos, and with the king's recruiters prowling. Remember those war rumors? The roads are a trap. You flex your hand, the pain a hot spike, and wonder if you could fight off a thief. You think of that fish, hidden under the straw, your last card against this new wave of threats. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval thaws often brought floods, as frozen rivers broke, destroying homes and fields, while bandits exploited the chaos, robbing travelers in weakened villages. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Some peasants believed river spirits woke during thaws, demanding offerings of bread to calm the waters, though the bread usually just sank. Historians still argue whether floods or banditry caused more devastation in the fragile transition from winter to spring. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You think of the stream, its ice splitting, maybe freeing fish, if you could reach it. You think of Agnes, her hut still snowed in, but closer now with the thaw. You plan to trade the fish for her turnips. Remember that bartering hope? But bandits change the math. You'd trade your axe for safe passage, but your hand's weak, and the village feels like a target. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did bandits get him, or the cold? Speaking of danger, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant fear the thaw? Because it swapped snowstorms for bandit storms. You smirk, but it's grim, the drip outside a ticking clock. You think of that fish, your last hope. You could eat it now, before bandits sniff it out, or trade it to Agnes for news of safe paths. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for dry ground, feeling foolish but desperate. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, but their hunger's loud. You hide your wound, not wanting their fear, and wish you could promise them safety. But floods and thieves don't negotiate. You think of the Lord's castle, its stone walls high above floodwaters, their guards ready for bandits. Remember those feast rumors? They're safe. while you're a sitting duck. You heard a rumor. The Lord's men are patrolling the rivers, not to help, but to tax thawed trade. You'd trade your boots for their protection, but your hand's a traitor, and the castle's a fortress. You think of the church, the priest's sermons about God's mercy in spring. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered, and the thaw's mercy feels like a trap. The hut's dark, the air thick with dread. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. "The stream's waking," they whisper, and you nod, the sound a shared fear. You think of the village, where thaws spark hope and peril. Agnes might know safe routes, her gossip a map. You'll dig to her hut tomorrow, trade the fish for news. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their panic. You want to promise them dry feet, but bandits and floods are as cruel as snow. Here's another joke. What's a medieval bandit's favorite season? Thaw, because it's open season on peasants. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a boy who tamed a river with a song. They listen, eyes heavy, the ash a grim comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The wood's gone, the forest a muddy threat. You think of Agnes, her wisdom, her hut, maybe a path to dodge the dangers. The night deepens, the hut a tomb, but for the kids' faint warmth and the drip of thaw. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending courage, but the wound's heat and the new threats crush you. The fire's out, the cold a fading king, but floods and bandits rise. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all caught in the thaw's chaos. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where rivers stay calm, where winter's end spares you one more fight. You're slumped in your hut, the fire long gone, its ashes a cold echo in the dim gray of a thawing dawn. Your hand's a throbbing furnace, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip? Swollen and feverish under its grimy rag. The kids are asleep, their breaths faint. The sick ones cough a soft wisp. Your spouse sits close, their eyes sunken, listening to the drip of melting snow outside. Grandmother's silent, her prayers drained, and the cow's dead. Remember that final breath? Her ribs a stark relic of loss. The village is stirring, rivers cracking open. Remember that thaw's danger? But you're planting seeds, doubting they'll grow in time to save you from hunger's grip. Spring's a whisper, but its promises feel as false as winter's mercy. You shift on the straw, the cold still biting, your cloak a useless rag. You clutch a handful of seeds, barley maybe, scavenged from the empty grain sack, your last gamble before the fish runs out. The ground's still hard, the thaw too new, but you're desperate to plant, to believe in growth. You think of the fields, muddy and treacherous, where floods lurk. Remember those river rumors? Your hand's weak, but you'll dig, hoping for a harvest before starvation wins. The kids' faces are gaunt, their eyes closed. and you pray these seeds sprout faster than their hunger grows. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants planted crops like barley and rye in early spring, but late thaws and floods often delayed sowing, leading to poor harvests and prolonged famines. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers tossed seeds with a chant, believing it woke the earth, though it mostly just fed the birds. Historians still argue whether failed spring plantings or winter's lingering toll caused more deaths in these fragile months. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain a burning spike, and wonder if you can still dig a furrow. You think of Agnes, her hut now reachable with the thaw. She's planted before, her hands steadier than yours. You plan to trade that dried fish for her turnips. Remember that bartering hope? But now you're thinking seeds, maybe her advice. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did his fields fail, or did he? Speaking of failure, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant plant in spring? Because he thought dirt was hungrier than he was. You smirk, but it's grim, the drip outside a restless clock. You think of that fish, your last card. You could eat it to fuel your planting, or trade it to Agnes for more seeds. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for fertile soil, feeling foolish but desperate. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, but their hunger's loud. You hide your wound, not wanting their fear, and wish you could promise them bread, but seeds are slow, and spring's a liar. You think of the Lord's castle, its fields already sown by serfs, their granaries full. Remember those feast rumors? They'll reap while you starve, their seeds guaranteed by wealth. You heard a rumor. The Lord's men are guarding fields, not yours, ready to tax your first sprout. You'd trade your boots for their tools, but your hand's a traitor, and the castle's a fortress. You think of the church, the priest's sermons about God's harvest. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered, and spring's bounty feels like another sermon, not a truth. The hut's dark, the air thick with doubt. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. We'll plant, they whisper, and you nod, the act a shared defiance. You think of the village, where thaws spark action. Agnes might have seeds, her hut a faint hope. You'll walk tomorrow, trade the fish for her wisdom. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their panic. You want to promise them growth, but floods and bandits, remember those thaw threats? Loom as cruel as snow. Here's another joke. What's a medieval seed's favorite promise? Sprout now, starve later. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a girl who planted a seed and grew a forest. They listen, eyes heavy, the ash a grim comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The woods gone, the forest a muddy threat. You think of Agnes, her fields, her know-how. Maybe a seed to save you. The day creeps in. The thaws drip, a restless hum. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending strength, but the wound's heat and hunger's weight crush you. The fire's out, the cold a fading king, but spring's risks rise. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all betting on a harvest you can't trust. You lie down, the straw sharp. the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where seeds grow fast, where spring spares you one more fight. You're slumped in your hut, the fire a faint memory, its ashes cold as the thawing mud that creeps under your door. Your hands a throbbing torment, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip, swollen and feverish under its grimy rag? The kids are asleep, their breaths faint. The sick ones cough a soft ghost. Your spouse sits close, their eyes sunken, listening to the restless drip of melting snow. Grandmother's silent, her strength gone, and the cows dead. Remember that final breath? Her ribs a stark relic of loss. The village is stirring, rivers swelling. Remember those flood dangers? But you're imagining modern comforts, central heating and warm beds. A cruel fantasy that mocks your frozen toes, and the endless cycle of winter's grip. You shift on the straw, the cold gnawing your bones, your cloak a useless rag. You picture a glowing heater, its hum a lullaby, warming your hut in seconds. You see soft blankets, not this tattered scrap, and a fridge stuffed with food, not that dried fish you're hiding, your last hope, unplayed. You laugh, a dry sound, at the thought of hot showers washing away your grime. Remember that filth you're caked in? Your hand pulses, and you imagine antibiotics, a pill to kill the fever, not Agnes's herbs or the healer's useless paste. The kids' faces are gaunt, their eyes closed, and you dream of giving them hot soup, not muddy barley seeds. Remember that desperate planting? Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants lacked modern heating, relying on open fires that barely warmed drafty huts, with no insulation or sanitation, making winter a deadly ordeal compared to today's climate control. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers thought sleeping near the hearth gave fire dreams of warmth, though it mostly gave them burns or smoke-filled lungs. Historians still argue whether the absence of modern comforts or the psychological toll of cold caused more suffering in these harsh winters. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes sharp with worry. You flex your hand, the pain a burning spike, and imagine a hospital, clean bandages, not this rag. You think of Agnes, her hut now reachable. She's endured winters with no heaters, her stories a flicker of warmth. You plan to trade the fish for her wisdom. Remember that bartering hope? But now you're craving her tales of survival, a bridge to this fantasy of comfort. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a warning. Did he dream of warmth, or just die? Speaking of dreams, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant envy your heater? Because it didn't demand his last stick of wood. You smirk, but it's grim. The thaws drip a restless hum. You think of that fish, your last card. You could eat it to fuel your field work, or trade it to Agnes for a story to chase the cold. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for a thermostat, feeling foolish but desperate. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, but their hunger's loud. You hide your wound, not wanting their fear, and wish you could promise them a warm bed, but spring's cycle, remember that endless wheel, offers no switches to flip. You think of the Lord's castle, its stone walls a crude heater compared to yours, their fires roaring. Remember those feast rumors? They've got no thermostats, but they're closer than you. You heard a rumor. The Lord's men are using the thaw to rebuild, their hearths never cold. You'd trade your boots for their embers, but your hand's a traitor, and the castle's a fortress. You think of the church, the priest's sermons about heavenly warmth. You prayed for your cow, your kid's cough, your hand. Nothing's answered, and modern comforts are a heaven you'll never touch. The hut's dark, the air thick with longing. Your spouse catches your eye, their face hard. "We'd be warm," they whisper, imagining your fantasy, and you nod, the dream a shared ache. You think of the village, where thaws spark weary action. Agnes might have stories, her hut a faint light. You'll walk tomorrow, trade the fish for her resilience. The kids stir, the sick one coughing softly, and you hide your wound, not wanting their panic. You want to promise them heat, but the cycle's as cold as your toes. Here's another joke. What's a medieval peasant's favorite modern trick? A heater that doesn't eat his forest. You chuckle, but it's hollow. The kid's too weak to care. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a man who found a magic flame that warmed forever. They listen, eyes heavy, the ash a grim comfort. You're not sure you believe the tale, but it soothes them. The wood's gone, the forest a muddy threat. You think of Agnes, her endurance, her hut, maybe a tale to mimic your dream. The day creeps in. The thaws drip a weary hum. Your spouse watches you, their silence heavy. You nod, pretending courage. But the wound's heat and the cycle's weight crush you. The fire's out, the cold a fading king, but winter's shadow lingers. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all blind to your modern dreams. You lie down, the straw sharp, the kid's warmth faint, your hand a burning pulse. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where heat's a button, where winter spares you one more fight. You're slumped in your hut, the fire a ghost, its ashes cold as the thawing mud that seeps through the cracks. Your hands a throbbing agony, that festering cut. Remember that axe slip? Swollen and feverish under its grimy rag. The kids are asleep, their breaths faint. The sick ones cough a soft whisper. Your spouse sits close, their eyes sunken, listening to the restless drip of melting snow. Grandmother's silent, her strength gone, and the cow's dead. Remember that final breath? Her ribs a stark relic of loss. The village is stirring, rivers swelling. Remember those flood dangers? But you're reflecting on resilience, the stubborn will that's carried you through winter's horrors. You're clinging to that dried fish, your last hope, drifting toward sleep as you ponder the lessons of this brutal past. You shift on the straw, the cold still biting, your cloak a useless rag. You think of everything you've faced, starvation, blizzards, disease, and fear. Yet you're still here, your kids breathing, your spouse by your side. You think of Agnes, her hut a beacon of survival, her stories proof that winter can be outlasted. You traded that fish today, a final barter for her turnip and a whispered tale of hope. Remember that desperate walk? Your hand's weak, but your will isn't, forged in the crucible of this endless freeze. You think of the seeds you planted, Remember that muddy gamble? And imagine them sprouting, a defiance of the cycle that looms again. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants showed remarkable resilience, surviving winters through communal support, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness, rebuilding each spring despite devastating losses. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some villagers tied survival knots in straw, believing each knot held a day's strength, a charm that lasted until the straw broke. Historians still argue whether this resilience was born more from necessity or a cultural grit passed down through generations. You glance at the kids, their frail forms curled under a tattered blanket. You've kept your wound hidden, but your spouse knows, their eyes soft with shared endurance. You flex your hand, the pain a burning spike, and think of modern hospitals. Remember that heater dream? But you're proud of your grit. No pills needed. You think of Agnes, her tales of surviving worse winters, her laughter a spark you've borrowed. You think of the baker's empty hut, its silence a lesson. Resilience isn't guaranteed, but it's yours for now. You mutter a charm, not for spirits, but for courage, feeling less foolish, more defiant. The kids stir, the sick one quieter, their survival your fire. Speaking of fire, here's a joke. Why did the medieval peasant keep going? Because giving up was colder than winter. You smirk, but it's warm. The thaws drip a gentle hum now. You think of that fish, now gone, traded for a turnip that fed your kids tonight. You think of the village, where survivors like Agnes weave a thread of hope. Agnes said she'd help you plant tomorrow, her strength a gift. You think of the Lord's castle, its feasts a world apart. Remember those rumors? But you've outlasted their taxes, their wars. You think of the church, the priest's sermons about suffering's purpose. You prayed, and maybe this stubborn will is your answer. You think of the cycle, remember that endless wheel, and no winter's coming again, but you're different now, hardened by hunger, snow, and loss. You think of the kids' games, their snow forts, remember their laughter, and vow to hear it again. You think of the cow, the blizzards, the bandits, the witch whispers, all battles you've fought, scars you wear. Your hand pulses, but it's a badge, not a defeat. You think of modern comforts, heaters and fridges, and smile. They're nice, but you've got something fiercer. The will to keep breathing, to plant, to fight. Here's another joke. What's a medieval peasant's secret weapon? A heart too stubborn to freeze. You chuckle, soft, the kids too weak to hear, but you feel it. You tell them a story, keeping your hand still, about a family who beat winter with love. They listen, eyes heavy, the ash a quiet comfort. You believe this tale, and it soothes you all. The wood's gone, the forest a muddy promise. You think of Agnes, her hut, her grit. Tomorrow, you'll plant with her, a step towards spring. The day fades, the thaws drip a lullaby. Your spouse watches you, their silence warm. You nod, feeling strength, the wound's heat a fading foe. The cold's a memory, spring a faint song. You think of the village, the castle, the church, all part of your story, but not its heart. You lie down, the straw soft, The kid's warmth a gentle tide, your hand a quiet pulse. Now let the village fade, its snows melting into a distant hum. You're safe, your breath slow, the straw a cradle rocking you gently. Feel the kids' warmth, a soft anchor, their breaths a rhythm like a stream's flow. The thaw's drip is a whisper, not a threat, carrying you toward a green dawn. You've fought, you've endured, and that's enough. Let the pain in your hand drift, a cloud passing over a calm sky. The world's quiet, the stars above waiting to guide you. Sink deeper, your eyes heavy, the cold a story told and done. Sleeps here, wrapping you like a warm cloak. No hunger, no fear. Rest now, sweet dreamer, in a world where spring's already won.